The Russians have sustained the largest weapons development program ever launched by any nation, and they have kept it effectively hidden from prying Western eyes. I have called this program Fer de Lance after the deadly South American pit viper of that name. The dreaded Fer de Lance is a snake of great agility and lethal effect. It often ambushes its hapless prey, striking unexpectedly and without warning. Its first sudden strike is usually lethal to its victim, which promptly expires in writhing agony. Since the Soviet development of scalar electromagnetic weapons has been designed for the same purpose, the name seems appropriate. 2002 Overview and Background. For some time, Russia and several other nations have possessed highly advanced extended electromagnetics, energetics, weapons of a very novel kind, using a dramatically extended electrodynamics theory. To comprehend these weapons requires a combination of non-abelian electrodynamics in at least the 0.3 gauge symmetry, general relativity, Bohm's interpretation of quantum mechanics, and the use of time domain, scalar, energy, fields, and potentials to directly enter distant 3 spatial points without propagating energy through 3-dimension space. It also requires correcting many of the serious errors in classical electrodynamics. Probably the most elegant and applicable extant model to deal with these phenomena and weapons is Sachs' unification of general relativity and extended electrodynamics, particularly as implemented in O3 electrodynamics. O3 allows direct engineering by modified electromagnetic means. Most of these energetics weapons are more advanced than what has previously been known to the U.S. military, intelligence, and scientific communities, although parts of the communities are finally making real progress in understanding such revolutionary areas. For example, every major weapons lab on Earth seems to have discovered longitudinal electromagnetic waves and longitudinal electromagnetic wave weapons, the scalar interferometry we have been discussing for so long. A major contributing factor holding back U.S. catch-up is that the flawed foundations of Maxwell's 1865 theory have not been changed by the Western scientific community. Historically, the scientific community exerts resistance to substantial innovation. Often 40 to 50 years are required to do what can be done with a concerted effort in 4 years. The Manhattan Project in World War II is a notable example of where the scientific community made a maximum effort and did a difficult job in 4 years. Also, Skunk Works efforts continue to be utilized for very rapid development when something really advanced is to be done and done quickly. With the US substantially behind in these new strategic superweapons, a new Manhattan Project would appear to be advisable and warranted. There are at least some indications that such may actually be going on at last. We hope the indications are true. A sobering development that occurred early this year, 2002, was China's deployment of both quantum potential, QP, weapons and negative energy electromagnetic pulse weapons, a type which we originally called the mind snapper to disguise its true nature. The quantum potential weapons are the dominant weapons on Earth today, followed closely by negative energy electromagnetic pulse weapons in second place. We have not been able to ascertain exactly how many nations have the negative energy electromagnetic pulse weapons, but it is at least 5 at the time of this writing. The US is still well behind in the use of special engines, special curvatures of space-time and their dynamics, but achieved with higher group symmetry electrodynamics, for directly engineering the mind itself, and for producing non-material robot systems made totally of such engines, causal system robots, which we will mention later. Several of the Western nations do accomplish work in the mind control area, but use a sort of brute force method oriented on frequency and frequency changes, etc., where the true active mode is the unsuspected transformations of the U1 electrodynamics to a higher group symmetry unified field theory electrodynamics, accomplished by the human body tissues and structures themselves. Western scientists have not realized that all electromagnetic energy in 3 space actually comes from the time domain to each point in 3 space and returns from that 3-dimensional space point back to the time domain 3. Hence, propagation of 3-dimensional space electromagnetic energy is actually the propagation of a circulation of electromagnetic energy between the time domain and 3 space, involving each 3 space point presently said to be occupied by the energy. Unfortunately, Western science is still unaware that no observable exists in time, a priori, since by definition it has no extension in the time dimension at all. Instead, an observable continually recurs as a frozen 3-dimensional space snapshot of an ongoing dynamic 4-dimensional space interaction, due to the continual repetition of the observation process, which is the application of a change in time operator to the ongoing 4 interaction. Hence, we see physical reality, 3-dimensional space reality, similarly to the way we view a motion picture series of successive frozen frames. The major result of this flaw, mistaking a 3-space observable as a 4-spatial cause, in Western science is that Western science still extensively substitutes effect for cause, for example, in the notion of a separate 3 force acting on a separate 3 mass. No such situation exists in nature, and nothing moves or changes in 3-dimensional space alone. For an entity to exist in time, it requires at least 4 space because a time length is required. Nonetheless, the West is making progress. If some of its scientific dogma can be overcome, the younger scientists will break free and readily do the job required for the defense of this nation. Mad scramble of Soviet science after the end of World War II. During World War II, the West produced a great technical breakthrough and obtained the atom bomb as a decisive new weapon. While speeding up his own atomic weapons program as a result, Stalin also ordered his own Academy of Sciences to quickly derive the next great new technical breakthrough, and he held the top scientific leaders themselves personally accountable to him, to see that it was done at all speed. Simply put, Stalin placed the heads of the Soviet scientific leaders on the chopping block, since he was an absolute dictator and often killed or imprisoned those who opposed his instructions. To survive, the leaders of the Soviet Academy had to demand the utmost of their subordinates, because they themselves had to report their progress or lack of it to a dictator who would and did take swift action if they did not produce results. Thus, Stalin simply bypassed the usual scientific posturing and protracted delay so typical of our Western scientific bureaucracies. If the directors of the Russian scientific community dragged their feet and did not push his desired program to the limit, their heads would roll, and some did. As a result of Stalin's forceful intervention, the entire Soviet scientific community was galvanized into a most intensive review of all of physics. The scientists desperately sought to quickly uncover potential breakthrough areas that could be developed into the great leap forward that Stalin demanded. They had to have progress, and they had to have it rapidly. One institute had 2,000 PhDs and a full support staff. Large review institutions were quickly set up, staffed with the best Soviet scientists and support translators and teams. One such search institute involved some 2,000 PhDs along with their support staffs. Soviet ships brought in shiploads of copies of all the scientific journals of the West from the beginning, and they were reviewed paper by paper, page by page. Anything novel and implying new scientific possibilities, or anything that had not been adequately followed up, was laid aside in a select pile for further review and decision by the best Soviet theoreticians available. One gets a new physics by discovering shortcomings and flaws in the old one. This intensive Russian search almost immediately uncovered the deep flaws in classical electrodynamics, flaws that have been propagated throughout most other branches of science. Classical electrodynamics, and electrical engineering, is particularly beset by hoary flawed foundations problems, dating from at least 1865. As an example, the equations did and still do assume a material ether, and they have since the beginning. Not a single equation was changed when the Michelson-Morley experiments in the 1880s destroyed the material ether itself. The classical electromagnetic model also assumes a flat local spacetime, falsified by general relativity since 1915, and an inert vacuum, falsified in particle physics for several decades. It still assumes the same electromagnetic field in mass-free space as exists in mass, a non sequitur of major impact. Just to make the Maxwell-Heaviside equations easier to solve and avoid numerical methods, The totally arbitrary Lorentz symmetrical Riga Eugene 6 discards all electromagnetic systems far from equilibrium with their active vacuum environment. In fact, there is no active vacuum environment in the model, much less a broken symmetry in that exchange. Yet that very broken symmetry is exhibited by every charge and dipole, and thus by every M circuit and system. That asymmetry is involved in the continuously increasing giant Nej entropy poured out by every charge in the universe, thereby generating all electromagnetic fields and potentials and their energy, eventually reaching even across the universe, and with perfect macroscopic order and time duration as long as one wishes. Indeed, all electrodynamics is in total violation of the second law of thermodynamics, to any macroscopic size level and time duration desired. The terribly flawed electrodynamics model was completely overhauled by the Russian scientists very quickly, and the work was accomplished by some of the best nonlinear scientists in the world. Already present at the time were many things available to assist in dramatically extending the hoary 1865 Maxwellian electrodynamics. Gauge field theory was available since the turn of the 20th century, and the top theoreticians could readily see that something more than abelian electrodynamics was firmly required in particle physiks. The Yang-Mills theory met that need in 1954 by originating non-abelian gauge theory. Situation in the early 1950s. By 1950, Stalin's scientists had the beginnings of what they dubbed energetics, which we would dub an engineerable unified field theory. Longitudinal electromagnetic waves were primary in that more fundamental approach. By the mid-1950s, one can pick out of the open literature increasing incidences of prototype Russian energetics weapon testing around the world. In 1960, Khrushchev spoke obliquely of these fantastic new weapons that were just within the portfolio of the Soviet scientists, so to speak. Commercial aircraft sightings and the reports of their captains and crews are also a particularly significant source of sightings of Russian energetics weapons tests, as are sightings by ships' crews and ground observers. Typical shield test, northern route to Japan, seen by passing airliner. Giant missile shield test seen by passing ship's crew. Nick Downey's sighting from the ground of distant Soviet missile shield tests. 1963 deployment and immediate use of scalar interferometers. The first huge scalar potential interferometers of strategic range and power were deployed by the Soviets in 1963, and one was used to kill the USS Thresher nuclear attack submarine, Figure 6, leaving clearly recognizable signatures. Since 1963, the Russians have had the equivalent of more than 7 additional Manhattan projects, using the Russian 5-year program instead of the 4-year Manhattan project, back-to-back, in development of energetics weaponry. The energetics weapons have never been given to the regular Russian forces. Instead, all research, production, sighting, manning, and employment are by the KGB and still under ruthless KGB control by die-hard communist factions. Energy effect in distant zone may be either heating or cooling, and slow, rising, or fast, explosive. Specific patterns of local space-time curvature and dynamics, engines, may also be produced. Beams easily pass through Earth or ocean. Scalar, longitudinal M-wave, interferometer. Kill of the USS Thresher. With her controls jammed, the hull of the doomed submarine implodes when she reaches crush depth. An example of Russian technology astonishing Western scientists. Some years ago, coordinating with a Western but non-US aerospace firm, I furnished the firm with the names and addresses of some Russian scientists in Moscow, since it was clear from their internet site that the scientists were on the fringes of the KGB energetics weapons program. An excellent European engineer fluent in Russian was sent in, several times. Several unusual things were demonstrated to him, including, 1. Transmitting enormous energy down a very thin wire, and, 2. Cold molding, or turning metal into a liquid at room temperature, pouring it into a mold, and then letting it sit and harden. All without heating. The engineer also closely questioned the Russian scientists about Russian energetics weaponry, a subject the scientists were most reluctant to discuss. Finally they admitted the energetics weapons existed, and they actually obtained a meeting between the engineer and the KGB general who had directed the Soviet energetics weapon program for more than 20 years. In the meeting, the general coldly admitted the weapons, stated that of course you are not going to be allowed to see those, and confirmed that somehow the Russians obtained everything the present author writes, as soon as he writes it. The engineer then brought the Russian scientists to his aerospace firm in that Western nation, where the scientists demonstrated cold molding to assembled scientists and some US personnel. I forwarded a written explanation to the Western scientists of how the cold molding was performed technically. Later, on calling the engineer again, I discovered that the foreign authorities of that country had suddenly classified everything over there, and the engineer could no longer even talk to me without filing a foreign intelligence contact report. My own part in all this was completely open source, pro bono, and I had already written of it openly and publicly. Softening of metal at a distance was one effect used against the Challenger. At any rate, earlier I had openly advanced, and printed, the same mechanism, since it was the metal softening mechanism used by the KGB to kill the US Challenger spacecraft in 1986. Publicly I had been resoundingly called a lunatic for advancing such a preposterous thesis. Nonetheless, metal softening by a distant longitudinal wave interferometer was definitely utilized as part of the kill of the Challenger, as a close colleague here in the US proved experimentally, detecting and demonstrating that metal softening Russian signal prior to the kill of the Challenger. He amplified the signal and demonstrated on the bench its nearly instant softening of nails, rendering the nails momentarily as limp as wet noodles. Nails from the same box, not exposed to the signal, remained hard and could be hammered into a board. Not so the nails from the box that were exposed to the amplified Soviet signal. Those nails folded up like a wet noodle when tapped with a hammer, and could not be driven into a board. Working unpaid with the foreign scientists, we had in fact obtained the smoking gun proving that this cold molding capability rigorously existed in the KGB inventory. Further, it had existed so long that the KGB had essentially declassified it so that the civilian Russian scientists seeking employment funds from the West could utilize it. Proof of metal softening signal, golden softens nails with amplified woodpecker signal. Energetics, 3 branches and a strategic deception plan. The energetics weapons use exotic polarizations of electromagnetic waves, quantum potentials, and the info-LD longitudinal wave electrodynamics, both scalar and longitudinal photons, inside and comprising every ordinary transverse electromagnetic field and wave. The KGB energetic weapons are categorized according to what they are targeted against: 1. Against inert matter, fields, and potentials etc. That branch of weapons is called by the same name, energetics weapons. 2. Against living tissue, bodies, cells, biofields, biopotentials, etc., they are known as bioenergetic weapons. Disease induction electrodynamics such as used to irradiate the U.S. Embassy in Moscow are examples of bioenergetic weapons. 3. Against the mind, thought, memory, behavior, and the mind-body coupling mechanism, they are known as psychoenergetic weapons. Particularly in the latter mode, these weapons also use time-polarized, scalar, electromagnetic waves and time-polarized, scalar, photons as well. 3 branches of Russian energetics weapons. Energetics. Non-living systems. Scalar interferometry. Action at a distance. Quantum potential. Vacuum engines. Space-time structuring. Material, field effects. Nuclei, lattice changes. Hidden electromagnetic variables. Scalar wave zone effects. Bioenergetics. Living systems, bodies. Cells, cellular changes. Master cell control. Space-time structuring. Disease induction, remission. Action at a distance. Quantum potentials. Scalar interferometry. Hidden electromagnetic variables. Scalar wave zone effects. Psychoenergetics. Living systems, minds. Thoughts, memories, emotions. Conscious, unconscious minds. Space-time structuring. Species, biospheric minds. Action at a distance. Quantum potentials. Scalar interferometry. Hidden electromagnetic variables. Scalar wave zone effects. The KGB also implemented an elaborate and continuing deception plan, as is standard military practice for any great strategic attack plan. The KGB deception plan has been highly successful in keeping the United States convinced that these weapons do not exist, and convinced that the standard strategic nuclear weapons possessed by the West are leading and superior. Strategic attacks scheduled and why we were not destroyed. Indeed, the West's nuclear weapons are inferior to Russian energetics weapons, particularly to the quantum potential weapons deployed at the end of 1989 and to the newer causal system weapons deployed since the 1st of 1999, where functional robot systems are made of non-material space-time curvatures and their dynamics only. In the event of a full strategic Russian energetics strike, an opening strike with quantum potential weapons will dud all nuclear weapons on Earth, all nuclear power systems, and all nuclear propulsion systems in about 10 minutes. This takes care of most of the US strategic armament, within the first 10 minutes. The publicized strategic weapons of this nation have in my opinion been almost defenseless now for at least a full decade, but I also believe that situation may be rapidly changing for the better. A friendly little foreign nation does have such weapons, including quantum potential weapons that operate in multiply connected space-time. That little nation has been responsible for our continued survival and has continued to deter the planned KGB strategic energetics strikes upon the West. There are indications, though still not certain, that at least one and possibly two other friendly Western nation also possesses such weapons. Quantum potential instantly attacking widely separated targets. Internist patterns of space-time curvatures. Maxwell demons are electromagnetic hidden variables organized into dynamic space-time curvature structures acting at all levels. Highly structured Einsteinian space-time. Exact space-time curvature dynamics exists for any and all mass and electromagnetic system dynamics. For any mass system there is an exact space-time curvature system that interacts with it to cause its functions and actions. Causal system robots. These are sets of space-time curvature engines, with functions organized into a single complex weapon system with communication, propagation, weapons effects, and command and control functions incorporated. When the causal system robot interacts with mass, the mass performs those system functions. Twice in 1997 alone we were within days of the scheduled total strategic destruction of US by die-hard KGB energetic weapons, with all-out strategic attacks actually scheduled in each case. The first attack was scheduled in latter February but was quickly countered. The attack was immediately rescheduled for May 1. The US intelligence and scientific communities were apparently unaware of what was happening, and still do not believe it. However, as this author previously informed appropriate government agencies a few days prior to the attack scheduled for May 1, 1997, U.S. intelligence agencies certainly intercepted my urgent personal fax directly to the Prime Minister of the friendly little nation, urgently requesting that the sane command and control of the countering multiply connected space-time quantum potential weapons be changed to insane control and spelling out the compelling reason why it was necessary. In the insane weapons control mode, the computer periodically, say, every 2 hours, initiates launch sequence for the weapon, automatically. If any operating personnel remain alive on site, there is a designated short period in the sequence where the on-site personnel can countermand the order and abort the launch. If the order is not countermanded, the launch is not aborted and the doomsday weapon automatically fires. In that case, KGB military power and most of Russia would disappear from the face of the earth. This was necessary to nullify the impending strikes of mind snapper negative energy electromagnetic pulse weapons on those critical friendly quantum potential weapon sites to instantly kill all personnel on site. Strike by the mine snapper instantly kills every living thing in the area, and a protracted contamination remains whereby the struck areas emit longitudinal electromagnetic waves. If one attempts to insert new crews to resume operation of the weapons, the crewmen sicken and then die in the entry attempt. First, increasingly severe interference between mind and body control occurs. Then the individuals waver, lose consciousness, go into seizures, and their minds gradually decouple from their bodies and they die. Fortunately, alter my fax message, the C3 system was changed to the insane mode, and the Russians were notified, just in the nick of time. To prevent their own destruction by the certain insane counter-strike, the KGB aborted the looming strategic strikes. Ironically, at about the very time that the KGB strategic armada was standing down, Secretary of Defense Cohen was making the following statement: in Georgia, others are engaging even in an echo type of terrorism whereby they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes, volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves. So there are plenty of ingenious minds out there that are at work finding ways in which they can wreak terror upon other nations. It's real, and that's the reason why we have to intensify our efforts. Almost certainly Secretary Cohen had no knowledge that, so to speak, a great sword of Damocles hanging over his head was being removed by a friendly little foreign nation at that very moment, as he uttered those words, apparently referring to the older longitudinal electromagnetic wave interferometer weapons. I suspect that Dr. Cohen is to this day still unaware of the incidents that were ongoing at the time of his poignant statement. Attempts to alert the nation. We alerted the President and the National Security Council as early as 1984. In 1998 we also furnished selected senators, congresspersons, and certain high-level U.S. government agencies with color copies of a 200-page briefing and expose of, among other things, these weapons, their testing, and their clandestine use against the U.S. since 1963. Because of the nearly 50 years of demonstrated induction of diseases in personnel in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, for example, responsible for the deaths of 3 U.S. ambassadors, we also included part of the briefing on the priori work showing the remarkable cellular changes, time reversal of diseased states back to a previous earlier healthy condition, that can be and had been experimentally induced by energetics under rigorous scientific controls. Microwave radiation of U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Began in later 1950s. Discovered on Vice President Nixon's trip. Initially thought to be nuclear radiation, because it was discovered with Geiger counter. High-level target, United States Ambassador. Guarantees personal attention of United States Ambassador to Soviet Union. United States President. NSA, Central Intelligence Agency, DIA, National Security Council, etc. Top consulting scientists. Leading United States scientific institutions. 2 United States ambassadors died, another sickened. Anomalous health changes in personnel, only in zero field zero potential gradient areas. 4 United States presidents requested Soviets cease. Cut from 18 watts per square centimeter to 2 watts, then again increased. No one could understand what was going on. Aluminum screens were placed over windows. Moscow was declared a hazardous duty zone. We proposed to the Department of Defense a very rapid, high-priority development program to develop portable suitcase-sized computer-controlled treatment devices capable of saving a majority of mass casualties, for example, from a professional large anthrax attack on a major population center. Priori 1 laboratory and device for treating small animals. Portable unit for rapid treatment of mass casualties. 2 blankets have antennas in them. Uses an advanced but simple concept. Eliminates plasma tube mixing, etc. Computer-controlled complex signal structure. Irradiation for 2 minutes. 3 such treatments 1 week apart. Unit can be made self-powering on vacuum energy. The responses. The responses, or more exactly the near total lack thereof by various U.S. government agencies, were enlightening. For example, the National Institutes of Health never let the package out of its policy, i.e., political spin control, section. It did not check a single scientific reference on a proven method documented in the hard French scientific literature for reversing terminal cancer, infectious diseases, etc. Not a single scientist called me to discuss such a proven, revolutionary effect. Instead, the National Institutes of Health Policy section simply shipped the package over to the Department of Defense as their problem, not ours. That was because the package also explained how the Gulf War disease was induced, including how semen can cause infection of the wife, and how the structured body biopotential of the sickened veteran can induce similar structuring of the biopotentials of his children by proximity, thus inducing various aspects of the disease. Effective survival treatment of mass casualties could be developed. Meanwhile, we had uncovered a way to dramatically speed up the priori healing process, and use only normal transverse electromagnetic radiations for ready adaptation of existing equipment, while still forcing the same time reversal of diseased and damaged cells back to normal. Just much faster. This meant that very small, suitcase-sized treatment units could now be developed in a reasonable time, for example, in 2 to 3 years, given a high priority, intense effort, adequate funding, and a carefully chosen scientific team. So, we proposed a crash development by Department of Defense of a small, suitcase-size portable device for quick, mass treatment of mass U.S. casualties following terrorist attacks on our cities using weapons of mass destruction. Eventually an innocuous reply, forced by my congressman, simply stated it was not supported by the literature. In the package, of course, I had specifically cited the numerous scientific papers in the French scientific literature reporting and proving the experimental results. I had also worked 14 years to decipher the mechanism actually performing the revolutionary healing accomplished in rigorous animal testing by the priori team. 11 years after suppression of the priori effort, the University of Bordeaux, which had been pressured into rejecting priori's doctoral thesis, did approve and publish a doctoral thesis by Paris on the work. The National Science Foundation did not reply at all. Yet at the time the official strategic threat to the United States listed weapons of mass destruction attack on our cities and great population centers as the greatest threat of all. Today, as everyone knows, we are in a war after the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers in New York and on the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. The U.S. government clearly recognizes that it is not a matter of if additional attacks on the U.S. cities and populace will occur, but when. The terrorists are also known to have already infiltrated weapons of mass destruction such as biological warfare weapons, anthrax, smallpox, bubonic plague, etc. Nonetheless, apparently the National Science Foundation simply did not believe a novel but rigorously demonstrated, in the 1960s unorthodox process that could potentially save most of those millions of Americans who otherwise will surely die and who are going to die in the first major weapons of mass destruction strike on our population centers. The mass destruction weapons threat to our populace. Present but unrecognized. Negative energy electromagnetic pulse weapons. Quantum potential weapons. Electromagnetic biological warfare. Scalar electromagnetic weapons. Electromagnetic disease induction and spreading of immune systems. Alteration of behavior and emotions. Alteration of memory and perception. Control of thought and behavior. Action at a distance effects. Causal system robots. Causal system robots. The entire scientific method is based on assigning priority to experimental truth rather than dogmatic belief. If experiments refute the theory must be changed and the experimental results accepted. Else one is not following scientific method. Apparently the National Science Foundation does not follow scientific method, nor does it seem interested in doing so. Neither do the National Institutes of Health. The decisive results of some 2,000 rigorous animal experiments reported in the refereed scientific literature in leading French journals, by multiple established French scientists, were simply ignored because the results are contrary to present dogma. Meanwhile, 4 years have been lost. During that 4 years, the portable units could have already been developed, mass-produced, and made available to treat and save millions of coming U.S. civilian casualties. Apparently the lives of those Americans are not as important as maintaining the present medical dogma. When those millions do die, and they will, we shall most certainly remind those agencies of the caliber of their dedication to scientific method and of their service to their fellow Americans. In my personal view, ignoring a chance to save so many Americans is treason of a very special kind. The official silence was deafening. Not a single scientist in any of those and other organizations seems to have taken the package seriously. Not one called me to discuss it, or apparently studied the references, etc. No one asked for a personal briefing. No one was interested in the actual photo of the strike of a Russian electromagnetic missile from a scalar interferometer, offset from a U.S. night shuttle launch from Cape Canaveral in latter November 1985, or the photo of the actual registration point ball of light high in the air over that same shuttle launch. The same weapon then killed the Arrow DC-8 at Gander, Newfoundland about 2 weeks later. An eyewitness, or more than one, actually observed the streak of light from the sky that struck the Arrow DC-8 in the right fuselage ahead of the engines, after the thrust of the engines were reduced during takeoff by use of a negative energy, cooling, interferometer. A similar ball of light associated with the kill of a Titan missile fired from Vandenberg AFB in early 1986 and printed in Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine, was also apparently of no concern. Scalar interferometer operator fires offset electromagnetic missile from Russia. Soviet electromagnetic missile strike offset from U.S. shuttle launch at Cape Canaveral on November 26, 1985. This is the smoking gun. These remarks are intended to show the lack of understanding that has existed in our governmental, scientific, and intelligence communities of what energetics is and of the great energetic superweapons that have been developed. With the present rapidly growing interest in longitudinal electromagnetic waves, however, we suspect that such lack of understanding is now no longer the case. We certainly hope that is true, and we are much encouraged that at least one and possibly two friendly Western nations now possess quantum potential weapons. Distant operator on site in Russia slews away the registration point, the marker beacon. 2 weeks later, the same weapon killed the Arrow DC-8 at its takeoff from Gander, Newfoundland. Marker beacon above U.S. shuttle launch at Cape Canaveral, November 26, 1985. Russian crews were using shuttle launches as practice intercontinental ballistic missile launch targets. Kill of the Arrow DC-8 at Gander, Newfoundland December 12, 1985. Time charging of atomic nuclei, slow. Electrostatic cooling of engine combustion. Kindling self-targeting. Engine thrust is reduced. Electromagnetic missile strike multiple instrument spikes. Aircraft glowing, thrust reduced. Cyanide inhalation. Explosive plastics ignition, fire outgassing. About half the occupants die. Fuel explosion. Materials emit longitudinal wave electromagnetic radiation from time charge decay. Recovered personnel irradiated. The long dry spell in correcting electrodynamics may be slowly ending. In over 20 years of unrelenting effort, until 1999 we were unable to get any significant Western scientists of real horsepower, for example, in non-abelian electrodynamics, foundations errors in electrodynamics, advanced gauge field theory, general relativity, etc., to meticulously examine conventional U-1 electrodynamics and its glaring errors, and to look at weapons implications of higher group symmetry electrodynamics. Beginning about 3 years ago, however, a noted scientist, Dr. Myron Evans, along with other theoretical scientists of the Alpha Institute's Institute of Advanced Study, AIAS, have been extending electrodynamics by developing the 0-3 electrodynamics. They also have deeply examined the Whittaker work of 1903 and 1904 on which the early part of the Russian energetics weapons are based. The AIAS analyses, and subsequent papers by Dr. Evans and Alex Labounsky as well as by the entire AIAS group, have clearly established the primary importance of time-like precursors of electromagnetic fields, operating in mass-free spacetime where fields E and B cannot exist. These time-like precursors create all the rest of the conventional electrodynamic entities. This is a dramatic extension to electrodynamics and physics across the board. More than 100 papers have been produced to date, with more than 30 published in journals such as Foundations of Physics, and many of the others are either accepted or still in the referee process with various journals. Some 60 of the papers were published as a single special edition of the Journal of New Energy in latter 1999, and a second edition of Modern Nonlinear Optics, Wiley, 2001 has been published with many important papers. However, the problem is that the scientific community, which is strongly committed to business as usual, has funded none of this work. The conventional lead agencies of the community are still in the ostrich position, with their heads buried very firmly in the sand with respect to the terrible damage they continue to enforce on this nation by their continued perpetuation of an old, long archaic, inadequate electrodynamics and electrical engineering. Engineerable unified field theory is now clearly appearing. The rapidly emerging AIAS extension of electrodynamics has met in the middle with Sachs' for revolutionary generalization of general relativity and electrodynamics. For the first time, an engineerable unified field theory employing 0.3 electrodynamic means is now being produced. The AIAS work in 0.3 electrodynamics was shown to be an important subset of Sachs' approach. It also now provides the full, rigorous theoretical foundation and model for the priori mechanisms and results. We also comment most strongly that the important SU2, XSU2, electrodynamics as developed by Barrett, 47, leads to essentially the same conclusions, since Barrett's electrodynamics is homomorphic with 0.3 electrodynamics. Barrett, of course, is one of the pioneers of ultra-wideband radar, another scientific area that was fiercely opposed and suppressed by the orthodox U.S. establishment for some time. Ironically, today those very scientists who were so dogmatic in their vociferous condemnation of ultra-wideband radar, have assumed the mantle of experts in the ultra-wideband field, sometimes even taking credit for having advanced it in the first place. Examples of some major non sequiturs in conventional electrodynamics. In every textbook and millions of technical papers in the West, electrodynamicists routinely calculate the magnitude of the scalar potential. Actually, not a single one including Maxwell calculated or calculates the magnitude of the potential itself. Instead, they universally calculate the reaction cross-section of the potential at a point occupied by an assumed intercepting collecting unit point static charge. At best that is a representation of the intensity of the field at each point. The reaction cross-section of the potential with a fixed unit point static charge is indeed a scalar value. The scalar potential itself, on the other hand, is not its own reaction cross-section at each point of itself, and it is not a scalar entity at all. Instead, it is a harmonic bundle of bidirectional electromagnetic longitudinal phase conjugate wave pairs, as shown by E.T. Whittaker in 1903. It is and always has been a multivectorial, multi-wave entity. By slightly reinterpreting Whittaker's work to agree with quantum field theory, the scalar potential is also a circulation of electromagnetic energy from the time domain to 3 space and back to the time domain, at every point in space that is occupied by the potential. Further, the field notion is utilized in two self-contradictory manners. On the one hand, it is assumed in the massless reaches of space, and on the other hand it is assumed in mass, which is the only case in which a force field is properly defined. The so-called electromagnetic field existing in empty space is not an M-force field at all, but a curvature or curvatures of space-time with assorted dynamics. Space-time is after all active, and being active means curvatures and dynamics. As rigorously shown by the AIAS theoreticians, What exists in space-time before the force fields appear on reacting charged mass are time-like and longitudinal scalar potentials and fluxes. These pre-electromagnetic field entities in fact interact with mass to produce all the force fields, the electromagnetic fields. Mass is a component of force, simply by force equals momentum change divided by time interval, which is expanded into force equals change of mass velocity divided by time span, which is mass acceleration plus velocity times mass change divided by time span. Note that both terms have mass as a component. Hence there is no force or force field when mass is absent. Present mechanics is seriously wrong, and has been wrong for hundreds of years, in assuming a separate massless force acting upon a separate mass. Jackson, one of the ablest classical electrodynamicists of our day, adroitly states how electrodynamicists skirt that issue. Quoting, p. 249 of his Classical Electrodynamics, 2nd edition, most classical electrodynamicists continue to adhere to the notion that the electromagnetic force field exists as such in the vacuum, but do admit that physically measurable quantities such as force somehow involve the product of charge and field. Our comment is that one does not get an observable until after the interaction of a cause with a previous effect, to provide a change, a new effect. The for-cause itself, in this case the field that actually exists in the vacuum, is never observed nor is it observable. Its effect, force with an affected observable mass as a component of it, is observed. The field in space and the field in matter thus do not even have the same fundamental units, but differ by a factor of m. In electrodynamics the m is avoided by defining the field as force per unit coulomb of charge, without saying or accounting charged mass. Wide confusion of cause and effect present electrodynamics, and even the hoary old mechanics, as pointed out, has thoroughly confused the causal, force-space, side of the observation process with the effects, 3-space, side. Observation yields 3 spatial entities, not 4 spatial. Indeed, as is well known, time is not observable, even in theory. That is really because observation is a d divided by dt process applied by the 3-space intermediary, for example, mass, being acted upon by the causal, 4-space, entity in spacetime, to produce a change in that intermediary, 3-spatial, that results, is observed. A priori, the output of the observation process does not even exist in time, since its fundamental units are LLL and not LLLT. The observation process is thus d divided by time, LLLT, change results in LLL. Further, electrodynamics omits the fact that, not only does the causal entity act upon the intermediary to produce the effect, changes to the intermediary, but those changes, effects, also act back, in reverse, through the intermediary to produce changes in the causal entity itself. This mutual interaction between cause and effect, but never stressed in exactly that manner, is well known in general relativity, where the curvature of space-time acts upon mass energy to change it, and the resulting change in mass energy also acts back upon space-time to curve it. The omission of the latter back reaction in electromagnetic theory by Maxwell resulted in omitting half the energy, half the wave, and half the causal entity in space-time, as well as half the effect. The missing half of the effect appears as the Newtonian third law reaction, which in electrodynamics is just mystically assumed to be an effect without a cause. The vast importance of restoring this missing back action of effect upon cause is because it can be deliberately utilized to directly engineer the causal, for-space, state itself, producing non-material engines and unobservable functioning robot systems comprised entirely of curvatures of space-time and their dynamics. Such causal system robots can be designed and engineered to then perform almost any desired action upon normal mass systems they encounter. The robots also can easily penetrate vast depths of mass, which is mostly empty space filled with potentials, fields and waves, all of which are just bundles of longitudinal electromagnetic waves and their dynamics. Mass is actually a vast superhighway through which such causal system robots can easily move at the speed of light. CSRS, engineering the unobserved causal side to create functional systems. Understanding early on the mutual interaction between cause and effect that existed in their energetics, the Russians were able to engineer this totally new kind of system, the causal system robot or CSR. With sufficient theoretical development, one can work backwards by adroitly re-engineering the effect to obtain a desired causal system, space-time curvature set along with its impressed dynamics, corresponding to some physical system and its changes one desires to engender. One thereby directly creates a deterministic set of space-time curvatures and impressed dynamics, which we call an engine. This space-time curvature engine system can then function as a completely separate system. One can communicate with it via longitudinal electromagnetic waves, control it, etc. By building in scalar interferometry functions, the causal system robot can be given weapons capabilities, etc. All levels of energy structures and all levels of time structures mold space-time geometry. The pattern is called a template for a vacuum engine, space-time curvature engine. Spatial and temporal structurings of engine act upon mass at all levels. This produces a template of forces, for precise translations and stresses within the mass at all levels. The forces exist in both time and 3-space. The principle of general relativity extended to include the concept of the vacuum engine. In theory, such a causal system robot can be assembled to perform any desired function or complex of functions upon matter, fields, potentials, etc. that is desired. In short, one can build real, functioning info-LD'd, subspace, robot weapon systems using this backward engineering of space-time itself process. The huge underground facilities, hundreds, that the Russians continued to build after the collapse of the Soviet economy and the fall of the Soviet Union, apparently contain the full causal system robot development and control facilities as well as the operational systems employed for this totally new kind of weapon system. A great engineering of the future lies in engineering causal system robots, which already constitute a great leap forward past the material nanobot technology being pursued in the West. Making the first causal system robot is extremely difficult, making 1 million copies is easy. The development of a specific causal system robot with a specific set of functions is akin to developing a highly complex software system of major proportions, several tens of millions of lines of code. The job is extremely difficult, and tortuous debugging is required for a lengthy period. Once a single causal system robot is completed and debugged, however, the production of thousands or even many millions of copies is then a trivial task. The causal system robot may be visualized as a sort of vast complex of longitudinal electromagnetic waves. Recall, we are speaking of space-time curvatures, not the conventional M waves thought to operate on a flat space-time. All electromagnetic waves operate in a curved space-time a priori, as clearly shown by Sachs. It turns out that all matter is mostly empty space, filled with potentials and fields. Space itself, considering its energetics, may be taken as a giant scalar potential. All those potentials and fields and waves are in fact nothing but sets of longitudinal electromagnetic waves and dynamics. In short, they are vast superhighways for the travel of causal system robots and the propagation of longitudinal electromagnetic waves. A causal system robot can be embedded within any kind of electromagnetic potential, wave, or field. So to replicate one embeds it in a magnetic signal and records that signal on a diskette or other media. Then one makes millions of copies of the diskette, for perhaps 10 cents or less each. Or do it en masse, by first completing a CD-ROM with 100 or 200 causal system robots embedded in its signals, figure 19. Then simply reproduce the CD-ROM. Every reproduction has another 100 or 2 exact duplicates of those causal system robots, made for almost no cost at all. With communications built into the causal system robots, the command and control facilities take charge of them, give them individual numbers or designations, and a robot armada emerges with most unusual capabilities indeed. The puzzling underground facilities in Russia, which our fellows apparently never deciphered and which remained a mystery, apparently contain the scientific teams, the research and development facilities, the production facilities, and the command and control facilities for the new vast causal system robot weapon complex. It was to see its first great employment at the end of 1999. Make a causal system robot. Insert causal system robot in electromagnetic signal carrier. Record signal on CD-ROM, tape, etc. Replicate CD-ROM en masse. Activate, command, park each one, then deploy each separately, in army of causal system robots attacking millions of targets. Mass reproduction of a causal system robot is simple and inexpensive. The causal system robot resides in, or propagates inside, any electromagnetic signal, potential, or field. In 1999 the KGB deployed massive numbers of causal system robots for a strategic attack. In latter 1999 the KGB began massively deploying these causal system robots of various types throughout the Western world, particularly including the United States. They simply sent the causal system robots back inside the potentials and fields and waves being emitted from radio stations, television stations, power lines, satellites, communication systems, inside matter, etc. These causal system robots were deployed and infiltrated in major command posts and installations throughout the US and its allies. True to form, the KGB even stimulated some major computer systems in critical US government facilities by having the robots surface some effects on the computers, right through the firewall programs, whose electromagnetic signals and operations indeed provided nice superhighways for the robots. Our fellows detected the interference as a sophisticated computer hacking attack, puzzlingly from the Russian Academy of Science, and then the robots submerged again after deliberately performing actions to produce obvious changes and guarantee the US detection of those changes. The purpose of this stimulus and probe was to see if the US was aware of causal system robots and causal system robot technology. We clearly showed we were not, and we still are not aware of them. Further, the entire government apparatus including all our vaunted national laboratories knows absolutely nothing at all about causal system robots, and none of the laboratories believe it. That is the same posture they've been in with respect to energetics weapons for a half-century. Apparently they will be in that same posture for another half-century, left to their own devices. However, I was not allowed to remain a casual onlooker for this new causal system robot armada. The KGB also planned to use me as a stimulus to ping the government yet another way, and then assess the government's response. Here in Huntsville, suddenly I was personally struck by such a causal system robot right from my computer monitor, with the attack riding through the light from the monitor to my eyes and retinas and right into the brain and nervous system. This was the type of causal system robot that can lurk in any potential or field inside a computer, and then strike and kill the operator looking at the screen. The causal system robot took over control of the machine, split the screen so that only 1-inch horizontal strips were luminous, one at the top and the other at the bottom of the screen with the middle dark. These two separated horizontal strips allowed scalar interferometry via the inner LWs comprising the light from the two strips. The longitudinal wave interferometer signals crossed in my vision center, where suddenly ordinary electromagnetic signals and waves were produced by the scalar interferometry occurring there. Present author struck by causal system robot in latter 1999 as a deliberate non-fatal stimulus. Stimulating apparently the only analyst capable of recognizing a causal system robot attack and connecting it with the scheduled giant strategic causal system robot attack. KGB general commanding the energetics weapon previously confirmed that what this analyst writes on his computer is received as soon as he writes it. Apparently accomplished by Tempeist techniques or directly by energetics. I saw rapid blinding flashes like 100 flashbulbs exploding at once right in my face. However, the signals representing those flashes were being created right there in my vision center. An external camera would have recorded only the weirdly separated screen display. It would not have shown the brilliant flashes of light I was seeing, unless it was set up stereoscopically. The strike was deliberately sustained for only about 10 seconds so as to be severe but non-lethal, about 30 seconds would be totally lethal. Violent fibrillation of the heart also resulted explosively, and I was instantly hypnagogic and seriously weakened by sudden hypoxia from near total lack of blood pumping, because of the fibrillation. The purpose was apparently to strike the only analyst in the US who would recognize what the nature of the attack was, stimulate him, watch him try to notify the government, and then observe the government's reaction. It took 4 days to recover from the strike. But I knew immediately what had made the strike, and that I had been hit with a causal system robot weaponized by having a built-in scalar interferometry capability. It was also a very sophisticated causal system robot, as it showed by assuming complete intelligent control of my computer's functions. When I finally recovered, I did notify the government and warn them of causal system robots, exactly as anticipated by the KGB. As might be expected, the government's total disbelief and lack of reaction clearly showed they knew nothing of causal system robots. They simply did not believe such weapons existed or even could exist. Sadly, once again one faced the not invented here syndrome. General relativity and its provision for space-time curvatures and their associated dynamics, engines, operating back upon mass are apparently just supposed to remain a theoretical curiosity. Why? Obviously no scientist in his right mind would think of weaponizing such. A more correct answer is, like hell they wouldn't. American scientists would not think of it, but Russian scientists with their national chess-playing psychology will immediately seize upon any opportunity even many moves ahead in the game and develop it and utilize it. They understand and use the boa constrictor. We only understand and use the immediate rattlesnake. How the asymmetrically deployed strategic attack was stopped in its tracks, however, we also alerted the little nation that has advanced electromagnetic weapons technology, which since early 1997 has been saving the US by forcing the abortion of impending KGB energetics weapons attacks. When I warned them in 1997 about the mind snapper weapons and mind control weapons used against Captains Button and Svoboda, unknown to me at the time, they later reacted and suddenly destroyed those facilities in Russia, apparently with violent scalar interferometry strikes. So that mind control type of attack being readied for 1999 was thwarted for a few years by these strikes sometime prior to mid-1998. Butto returned to the causal system robots. In the latter quarter of 1999, the Russians were developing and deploying throughout the West numerous kinds of causal system robots. So the period at the end of 1999 and first few days of 2000 attack was already scheduled for a massively programmed causal system robot attack. It was designed to cripple the entire nation, and perhaps even collapse it economically, yet all would be blamed on Y2K. Our scientific ignorance guaranteed that we would blame it on something mundane that our scientists could understand. Y2K problems in all the old software programs running so much of our automated systems, communications, and centralized functioning, accounting, banking, etc. In short, the KGB planned to give us a bicentennial gift, a Y2K nightmare far beyond our wildest fears. After my recovery from the causal system robot strike in the latter quarter of 1999, I again urgently alerted the friendly nation of the development of causal system robots and their widespread deployment and informed them of the personal attack on me and specifically why it was made non-fatal. Of course, I also alerted our own government. We were scheduled for a real Y2K problem that would curl one's hair, so to speak, with everything imaginable failing and probably all blamed on Y2K. Admirably, beginning just at the end of 1999, the friendly nation simply began methodically and massively cleaning out all the causal system robots, and they disposed of them in very short order. Such causal system robot systems 9 may easily be located and destroyed by strategic longitudinal electromagnetic wave weapons, when and if one has the longitudinal M-wave technology sufficiently developed. So Y2K came and went with only a few relatively minor incidents from the normal Y2K problems expected. However, unknown to our scientists and intelligence community, a great war of a very special kind, the Earth's first strategic subspace war, had just been silently fought and won, right there inside our power systems, command and control systems, major weapon systems, electrical power systems, electrical control systems of our nuclear submarines and strategic bombers and missiles, even inside the electronics of our nuclear warheads, etc. And not a bauble showed on the surface, anywhere. This was the first real subspace war, where weapons made of pure space-time curvatures and dynamics were involved as the main offensive battle systems. Longitudinal wave interferometers, destruction of numerous causal system robots inside potentials and fields in various electronic equipment throughout the nation, created little or no overt signs at all. This time we won, thanks to the good guys and not to our own scientific community. Next time we may not be so fortunate. The mostly ignored time-energy interaction, for some inexplicable reason, physicists in the West have omitted one half the actual photon interaction. If one allows the spatial energy component of the photon to interact, then one must also account for the simultaneous interaction of the time component of the photon. A mass m absorbing a photon, AE, at, becomes mass time mass plus change of mass, multiplied by time, not mass m. Mass m and mass time mount are as different as are force F and impulse feet. No scientist in his right mind would ignore the T in feet and consider just the force F. Yet that exact kind of giant faux pas has been done for many decades now in the photon interaction. And it is still ubiquitously done in physics. Mass does not emit photons, mass time does. Again, physicists confuse effect and cause. As the Russian energetics weapons scientists know full well, time is actually spatial energy compressed enormously, by at least the factor speed of light squared. Hence time has at least the equivalent energy density of mass. The greatest amount of energy existing in a photon, particularly in lower frequency photons, is in that time part that is arbitrarily ignored and discarded. An ELF photon has enormously more total energy by many orders of magnitude than does a gamma-ray photon. Energy and time components in the photon are canonical. Low-frequency photons are reduced in the magnitude of their spatial energy component and thereby maximized in their time components. For the ordinary, decompressed, energy equivalency of the time component, one must multiply the time in seconds by speed of light squared. Having the frequency, for example, doubles the time component, whose spatial equivalent energy is now with respect to the original photon, the new total energy, achieved by having the frequency, is given by so having the photon's frequency increases its total energy by a factor of speed of light squared, which is approximately by a factor of 9 multiplied by 10 power 16. Hence photons actually carry enormously greater total energy, most is locked up as time, at low frequency than at high frequency. Indeed, the highest energy photon interactions in the universe are at low frequency, if and when a transduction of the available time energy into spatial energy occurs. This has been completely missed in the West, but not by the Russian energetics weapons scientists. They have been engineering that formidable new high-energy but low-frequency physics of physics far more energetic than that used in our most energetic colliding beams in conventional high-energy physics. The cold fusion processes stumbled onto by Western scientists are using the time-energy component of photon interactions, to generate enormous localized electromagnetic energy directly upon the interior quarks and gluons of nucleons. We worked out a speculative explanation of the active time-energy transduction mechanisms that fits all the experimental phenomena, including the eerie instrument anomalies occurring in rigorous electrolyte experiments at China Lake for some years. That is included in my new book, Energy from the Vacuum, Concepts and Principles, Cheniere Press, Santa Barbara, California, 2002, available from www.cheniere.org. Of course, consistency alone does not prove it conclusively. Consistency is a necessary but not sufficient condition for proof. But at least the proposed explanation is consistent, and nothing else seems to be, at this time. In one chapter in my referenced new book we do cover the cold fusion mechanism and give specific new nuclear reactions producing the excess deuterium, tritium, and alpha particles in so many successful cold fusion experiments worldwide. My time reversal zone approach is stringent, because the recent work by Dennis Evans has clearly shown that reactions can and do run in reverse totally in violation of the second law of thermodynamics at micron, colloidal, level in size and for up to 2 seconds in duration, and sometimes even a little longer. So experimental demonstration that the time reversal zones I assumed can and do indeed occur has now been accomplished by Evans. This provides strong experimental and theoretical support for the basic assumption of the formation and momentary existence of localized time reversal zones that subsequently decay, we used to derive the fundamental cold fusion mechanism, including some of the specific reaction equations for excess deuterium, tritium, and alpha particles now demonstrated in hundreds of successful experiments. In a reversed zone, the law of attraction and repulsion of charges is reversed, so that like charges attract sometimes so closely that each enters the strong force region of the other, forming a quasi-nucleus. As the time reversal zone subsequently decays back to a time forward zone, the reduced strong force is restored much faster than the Coulomb force is reduced and then reversed back to normal. So during this readjustment decay process, the quasi-nucleus will simply change to an isomer and a known nucleus by quark flipping to change an positive hydrogen ion to a neutron. Note that the reversal zone momentarily changes the Coulomb barrier, always the only thing that has really prevented chemical fusion and transmutation at low spatial energy to a Coulomb attractor. Hence cold fusion, as now backed up by more than 600 successful experiments worldwide, by multiple laboratories and researchers in multiple nations, is an established fact and a herald for a vast new science based on deliberate and intentional reversal of the Coulomb barrier and use of time energy. With its usual perspicacity, the organized U.S. scientific community has flubbed it badly with respect to cold fusion. Its contribution has largely been a tirade of ad hominem attacks, slander, and libel of a viciousness seldom seen in the annals of science. Once again, the community is far more devoted to defending its cherished dogma, and its own rice bowls from the conventional big nuclear science that cold fusion thoroughly upsets, than it is in applying scientific method which calls for believing the experiments and changing the dogmatic theory. Fermion's time reverse in even numbers. Like charges cluster. Aqueous solutions contain positive hydrogen ions, which are just protons. Quarks flip as time reverse zone fades. Development of threats and scheduled attacks aborted. KGB energetics weapons have long constituted our single most pressing yet largely unrecognized national security problem. That problem has also increased with the growing development and deployment of such weapons by other nations such as China. Some 10 nations, for example, now have scalar interferometry weapons, and even the Japanese Yakuza has them and also has their own secret facilities for producing them in Japan, including small portable units developed for use in assassination and terrorist-type warfare within a targeted nation, the United States of America. Unknown to our government, we narrowly escaped destruction twice in the first half of 1997 from scheduled all-out strategic KGB energetics weapons attacks. Only the actions of a friendly small country countered the attacks and caused the KGB to abort on each occasion. When the second scheduled Russian strategic attack was aborted just prior to May 1, 1997, a new KGB counter for the friendly counter used by the little nation in latter April 1997 was already rapidly being deployed. The new Russian counter seizure and control of the mind of an operator at a distance, and complete control of his actions while he performs sophisticated technical tasks was tested in 2 separate incidents, first on Captain Button and then on Captain Svoboda about 2 months later, each flying an A-10 Warthog aircraft over the U.S. Captain Button's bizarre flight to his death on April 2, 1997. Instant hypnagogic state. Sense of horizontal direction skewed. Sense of time distorted. Dream thinking, flew a normal mission off course for over an hour and then crashed. At one point, circled. May have dropped ordnance there, dream thinking he was on range and attacking a target. Purpose, test psychoenergetic control of person and his precise actions at a distance. Multiple weapons can take over manning of an installation. Can control crew operations. can cause crew to switch off an insane assured destruction quantum potential weapons. Captain Button's flyaway path to his eventual fatal crash. The highly successful test against Captain Button is particularly significant, as we have explained. Captain Button was controlled while performing highly technical operations, for more than a full hour, and 1 hour was apparently the acceptance test specification. Captain Svoboda simply had her mental perception of up and down instantly reversed while climbing her A-10 Warthog from low-level ordnance delivery on target. Erroneously perceiving she was diving, she immediately corrected sharply to climb, thereby diving headlong into the ground and perishing in the resulting explosion of her aircraft. Purpose: stimulate US in same area again. Determine if US aware of psychoenergetics. US showed it is completely unaware. Shifted Svoboda's sense of up and down. Perceiving she was diving, Svoboda sharply corrected diving headlong into the ground and dying in the explosion. May 27, 1997. Captain Amy Svoboda. Experienced night flyer. Night training mission. From Davis Monthan AFB. From same wing as Captain Button, who flew his A-10 off course for over an hour and then crashed on April 2. Climbing out of low-level ordnance delivery, Captain Svoboda suddenly dives headlong to her death on May 27, 1997. Svoboda's kill demonstrated a tactical destruction usage, whereas Button's test demonstrated a strategic hostile usage of the adversary's defending weapons. Crew to take action against the adversary's defending strategic weapons system. A new KGB strategic energetics attack against the United States using the mind control, psychoenergetics, weaponry to take over the operators of the little nation's quantum potential weapon sites and stand the sites back down for maintenance was rescheduled apparently for latter 1997 to mid-1998 or so. It appears that the extensive preparations for that attack were totally destroyed clandestinely and very suddenly by the friendly little nation sometime after we warned them, as we mentioned above. However, still another Russian counter the development of weaponized engines, functioning causal system robot weapons, info-LD electromagnetic in form, consisting of organized and functioning systems of space-time curvatures operating in and traveling through electromagnetic fields, potentials, waves, and signals came online. The KGB simply altered the attack plan for a Millennium Strike and completed the forward deployment of these eerie new causal system robot systems by introducing millions of them directly throughout US facilities, command centers, weapon systems, power grids, ships, aircraft, submarines, missiles, nuclear warheads, computers, communication systems, etc. We estimate that several million such systems were introduced in that manner, and readied for the Millennium Strike. The United States and its allies were and are almost totally unprepared for this dramatically new kind of strategic warfare that has been developed and deployed against us. No such weapons have previously existed in history. Consequently, our national survival and the survival of our allies was once again at stake and right on schedule during the critical period from mid-1999 through mid-2000 that we had predicted back in 1997. The die-hard elements of the KGB indeed had a new millennium gift for us, but it was not at all the kind of gift we would appreciate. The KGB is not a monolith. This plot apparently did not include Putin, and it did not include the rest of the KGB, particularly that element reporting to Putin. Live destructive tests over and near the US have continued without elaboration. We believe that the Learjet crash incident and the EA-990 crash incident may have been very sophisticated tests of these new robotic causal electromagnetic systems. We also believe that the long years of Russian construction of over 1,000 mysterious underground facilities, even though the Russian economy was collapsed and the citizens and soldiers were destitute, is significant. Those facilities apparently contain the set of command and control systems for this vast new strategic weapons system. The facilities also include the factories where the causal system robots are made, because the factories are unlike any other factories ever conceived. They do not build physical systems, but something more like software. Only now the software program itself is an independent robotic system, with a full set of weapon systems functions, and capable of independent navigation and functioning anywhere, while remaining under KGB command and control via longitudinal electromagnetic wave communications info LD'd inside the potentials of Earth, ocean, and space. The facilities also contain the operational forces, headquarters, and communication and control systems that maintain, deploy, and employ, fight, these causal system robot systems, and direct the battle. The purpose of the 1998 document we sent to Department of Defense, which did not include the causal robot system armadas later deployed throughout everything in the West, was to inform selected members of the Senate and Congress of the energetics threat situation and summarize it for them. Accordingly, we presented the background of the development and testing of the KGB energetics weapons since World War II, in some detail, for selected legislators and their staffs. We also included some specifics on the failure of the U.S. scientific community to keep American science and technology abreast of that of our adversaries. The scientific basis for energetics weapons is established as pointed out above. The scientific basis for our early use of Soviet scalar M interferometry is now rigorously established by work accomplished by the Alpha Foundation's Institute of Advanced Study. It is also rather old hat now that all major weapons labs have discovered longitudinal electromagnetic waves and are actively working on and with them. The director of the AIAS, Dr. Myron Evans, is an eminent scientist and theoretician with over 600 papers in the hard science literature. He and his colleagues also have had zero funding for their work on the higher group symmetry electrodynamics necessary to understand such things as energetics. A combination of non-abelian electrodynamics, advanced gauge field theory, and the impact of E.T. Whittaker's work shortly after the turn of the century has shown that scalar interferometry is real, and that weapons based on scalar interferometry can be a potent threat on the battlefield. The time energy, basis for electrodynamics is now clearly established. With this important new work, we are now only some 40 years behind the Russian weapons scientists. But we are beginning to close the gap, and hopefully that will be done very rapidly. In 1999, after being personally attacked by a causal system robot, I again contacted the office of the leader of the friendly small nation and again furnished all the information we possess on the new causal system robot systems programmed by the KGB as a countering method against the small nation's quantum potential weapons. The outcome was that the little nation destroyed the causal system robots in time, as we stated above. We were lucky that, 1. The KGB did attack me with one of the weapons, deliberately to get my strong and immediate attention, and, 2. Deliberately did not kill me with the strike. Otherwise, there would have been no warning to the little nation, and the US and its allies would have experienced a Y2K problem worse than their wildest fears, possibly collapsing the economy of the United States and much of the developed world. Our situation here in the US is precarious. Meanwhile, our own scientific community apparently does little or nothing in these areas, except to castigate, slander and libel anyone daring to suggest that such out-of-the-box weapons areas even exist. For example, there does not appear to be a single US scientist who knows how to create a time-polarized electromagnetic wave. There do not seem to be any concerted programs to deal with T-polarized photons and T-polarized electromagnetic waves. Our scientists still firmly believe that one has to propagate spatial electromagnetic field energy through space to affect a target electromagnetically, when that was obsoleted by Russian subspace electromagnetic longitudinal wave propagation weapon systems deployed as early as 1963, and was completely obsoleted by deployment of quantum potential weapons in 1989. Yet a close colleague of the present author has single-handedly developed and demonstrated prototype superluminal communication systems using the info LD'd, longitudinal electromagnetic wave, electrodynamics, and these systems would have been heading onto the market in latter 2001 except for the sudden bankrupting of the major backing company. There has not been any funding forthcoming for his revolutionary work, but only clumsy attempts to take it from him. It is my fear that the further clumsy takeover attempts will be successful, and this desperately needed technology will never see the light of day in defense of our nation. As a single example without further discussion, his work revolutionizes the present notions used in the rapid development of quantum communication and quantum computing, because it revolutionizes the very notion of the qubit, completely removing the statistics of the quantum state and making it engineerable. This of course is completely counter to present quantum mechanics notions, but is consistent with the Bohm hidden variable approach to quantum mechanics. Meanwhile, our own weapons scientists apparently still do not recognize the possibility of a superluminal longitudinal electromagnetic wave communication system, and appear to have no motivation or intention to develop such. This is in a way quite sad. Quantum tunneling at more than 4 times the speed of light, of a clearly recognizable Mozart symphony, has already been demonstrated in a section of a waveguide. Whatever one wishes to call it and however one wishes to do it, superluminal communication of intelligible signals has been clearly demonstrated in the laboratory. For the info-LD longitudinal electromagnetic waves, all the normal or envelope electromagnetic waves, potentials, and fields are just great super waveguides for such longitudinal electromagnetic wave tunneling through subspace at superluminal speeds. The dominant weapons are quantum potential weapons. Full-bore deployment of Russian quantum potential weapons occurred by the end of 1989, the first lab prototype weapon having been tested in April 1986 against the US air attack on Libya. Beside Russia, 2 other nations, Brazil and the little friendly nation, also had developed quantum potential weapons. The United States did not develop them, or at least apparently not just yet. Mid-quantum potential weapon tested against electronics in US aircraft and missiles. Electromagnetic energy arises from every point in space-time inside the electronics. 33 US aircraft in strike. Many high-powered transmitters. Communications. Jammers. Radars. Severe unexpected electromagnetic interference encountered. 1 F-111 downed. Numerous weapons went astray. 3 foreign embassies damaged. 7 aircraft forced to abort. In 2002, China also deployed quantum potential weapons, and we now find that another friendly nation has them as well. That brings the total to 5, as of this writing. 2 of those are friendly, and a third is a straddle of the fence, so to speak. The other 2 are Russia, the KGB, and China. At this point China could go either way, so it represents a future enigma. China has control of the Panama Canal, and has inserted more than 200,000 Chinese into Panama, which is on the way to gradually becoming a Chinese territory, as soon as the Chinese in Panama outnumber the native Panamanians. In addition, under the Clinton administration China gained access through 2 US ports, with little checking, so anything can easily be inserted. China also has additional ports in the Western Hemisphere. China is almost certain to eventually attack and seize Taiwan, which puts her on a collision course with the US, since the US has an agreement to defend Taiwan. She has also declared the South China Sea, through which passes some 60% of the oil bound for Japan, and much oil for other nations, also to be Chinese territorial waters. China also has developed bioenergetics weapons, having long ago induced cancer into most of the GRU Russian representatives then serving in China. She almost certainly has or is rapidly working to develop psychoenergetics weapons as well. So far as I am aware, there still exists not a single funded US scientific program to directly correct the glaring errors in our own classical electrodynamics, such as those problems deplored by Nobelist Feynman and Wheeler. Both knew that the force field concept in space was erroneous. As they put it, only the potential for the force field exists in space, in case some charged mass is available there for interaction. But the field itself is created by the interaction and is the effect of it. It does not exist before the interaction occurs. Yet all our texts continue to teach the disinformation of the field in space. And our science community continues to fiercely defend such dogma, attacking and sometimes destroying the careers of those brave scientists who do try to change it. One notes that time is multiply connected, since in theory the same instant exists at every point in the universe. Or said another way, in any instant in time, every point in the universe simultaneously exists. Operating in the time domain as a causal system, and then turning out of one point there into any point in 3 space desired, is a means of producing action at a distance that obsoletes our old concept of transmitting the energy directly through space. Presently the US scientific community has little predisposition toward energy turning into the time domain, operating in the time domain, then turning out of the time domain into any desired point in 3 space, anywhere in the universe. Every 3 space point in the universe simultaneously exists in, is superposed in, each point in time, as those points in time occur. In one sense, time can be considered to be the total multiple connectedness of space. We suspect that it may even be possible to interpret instantaneous communication as by a quantum potential in that in here out there instantaneous fashion via tunneling through the multiple connection of the time channel. Finally, mass being an observable and 3, spatial does not exist in time. Mass continually turns into mass time, by photon absorption, then mass time turns back into mass, by photon emission. Mass time exists in time, but mass does not. US scientists also seem unaware that the so-called rate of flow of a mass through time is generated by the sum total of all photon interactions, both virtual and observable, with that mass. The ubiquitous interaction of a mass with photons also causes that mass to continually recur, and thus to seemingly continuously exist. It is continually observed, but it does not continuously cellular time reversal, revolutionary healing by a team of French scientists. Priori and eminent French scientists unwittingly used the mechanism for time reversing a mass and every part of it, to time reverse diseased and damaged cells, including tumor cells, physically changing them back to their previous healthy physical state and condition in vivo. This included all parts of the cell, including its genetics. The Priori team demonstrated revolutionary cures of terminal tumors, infectious diseases, atherosclerosis, and restored depressed immune systems. Simplified diagram of the immune system. The immune system heals nothing, not even its own damaged cells. The human cellular regenerative system is responsible for all healing in the body and it utilizes time reversal of the damaged cells as the active healing mechanism. The regenerative system pumps the damaged cells with longitudinal electromagnetic waves, and therefore with time-polarized electromagnetic waves, which always accompany longitudinal electromagnetic waves, inducing the cells and all their parts to add the phase conjugates, thereby forming time-polarized electromagnetic waves and pumping in the time domain rather than the 3-space domain. This dramatically extends nonlinear optics to the time domain, and mass pumped in that fashion is time-reversed, propagated back along its own time track, to a previous physical condition. Becker's theoretical control system involved with response to injury. Stimulation of repair cells. Mitosis dedifferentiation. Growth differentiation. Note, Becker only had conventional electromagnetics available, hence was unable to model the inner structuring and inner dynamics of the fields and potentials, so he missed the deeper engine and anti-engine mechanisms. Becker's proposed control system governing regeneration. Author's deeper block diagram of the cellular regeneration system. Kazanachiev's electromagnetic induction of cellular disease and disorder. Note, minimum lattice is one harmonic interval, infrared to ultraviolet is such a minimum G lattice. Consider particularly the dielectric pathway in the emitting diseased cells and in the receiving targeted healthy cells. Kazanachiev has shown that essentially any cellular disease or disorder can be electromagnetically induced in cells at a distance. Together with Becker's work, this shows that the cells can be altered either detrimentally, disease induction, or beneficially, disease elimination, by purely electromagnetic means. It would seem that diseases such as AIDS, for example, could be rather dramatically cured by use of whole-body longitudinal electromagnetic wave radiation, with its simultaneously time-polarized electromagnetic wave radiation, as was done for other diseases by the priori team and properly reported in the French scientific literature. We have also uncovered a process and method for causing the body to directly produce the time-polarized electromagnetic wave pumping, reducing the irradiation to perhaps 30 seconds of pumping instead of 2 or 3 hours. Becker's study of the cellular regeneration system in all our medical science, the only true healing procedures being utilized appear to be the use of Becker ETL's tiny electromagnetic stimulation across otherwise intractable bone fractures, to dedifferentiate, time reverse, red blood cells, then redifferentiate, time forward, them again twice to form osteoblasts, which are deposited in the fracture site to make new bone growth. All the other medical procedures seem to be interventions, not healing. After the intervention, which of course may be urgently necessary, it is then up to the body to heal itself, restore its cellular and tissue damage and functioning. So we have little healing science today, and in fact our medical establishment hardly funds any healing studies at all. Electromagnetic radiation is usually considered as something that simply heats tissue. Our present medical science is deeply engrossed in studying the immune system. Again, the immune system heals nothing, not even its own damaged cells. Becker's epical bone fracture healing. Tiny DC currents in picoamperes. Pulsed DC current can be utilized. Pulsed magnetic fields can be utilized. Red blood cell dedifferentiates. Shucks hemoglobin coat grows nucleus. New cell redifferentiates. Turns into type of cell that makes cartilage. New cell redifferentiates. Turns into type of cell that makes bone deposits in fracture site, healing the fracture. After the immune system kills the bad guys and saves the day, the battlefield is littered with residue and many cells of the body are damaged. The immune system sends in large scavenger cells that clean up the residue. And that's it for the immune system. Comparing it to an army's operation in the field, the immune system is the combat troops, not the medical services. Restoration, healing, of the damaged cells back to normal is accomplished by the cellular regeneration system. This system is little known and little studied, but mostly studied by Becker. It is a system that functions electrodynamically, but uses time domain pumping to time reverse the cells and their every part, including their genetics, back to an earlier state. In biology, the effect is called dedifferentiation, but without any knowledge of the actual electromagnetic mechanism. So, within its capabilities, the cellular regenerative system in the body already uses longitudinally polarized electromagnetic waves, time-polarized electromagnetic waves, and optical pumping by longitudinal waves and time-polarized waves. Here we point out that neither the longitudinal photon nor the scalar, time-polarized, photon is individually observable. However, the combination of the two is observed as the instantaneous scalar potential. With a little correction to properly make the phase conjugate replica wave a time-polarized electromagnetic wave, Whittaker's fundamental bidirectional electromagnetic longitudinal wave decomposition of the scalar potential is consistent. Immediately the direct involvement of both the scalar photon and the longitudinal photon and both the scalar electromagnetic wave and the longitudinal electromagnetic wave are seen in Becker's bone healing work using a scalar potential. Info LD longitudinal electromagnetic biwaves composition of a scalar potential, per Whittaker. The structure is a harmonic set of longitudinal wave pairs. In each wave pair, the two waves superpose spatially, but travel in opposite directions. The two are phase conjugates and time-reversed replicas of each other. Thus they comprise a coupled longitudinal wave and anti-wave. The photons must be coupled into photon-antiphoton pairs, gravitons, by a strong application of the distortion correction theorem of nonlinear optics. Each wave in the biwave pair is a galloping wave. Each wave pair is a standing electrogravitational wave. Note, think of the oscillations as velocity modulations. The time density carried by the waves is oscillating. Priori unwittingly stumbled onto the actual mechanism used by all biological systems in healing, cellular regeneration, and also recognized how to amplify it. but no one understood its exact nature, including Priori and the scientists who worked with him at the time, and the conventional community still does not understand it. The Russian scientists not only understood it early on, but weaponized it as well. So did the Chinese. Need to correct and extend classical electrodynamics. The organized scientific community's protracted defense of a seriously flawed classical electrodynamics is long-standing. The conventional, comfortable ways of doing business as usual, leisurely now threatens the survival of the nation itself. We need to quickly admit and correct long-standing electromagnetics errors such as calculating a reaction cross-section of an entity and calling it the magnitude of the entity itself. Our electrical texts continue to make that fundamental mistake, and they have done it now for 100 years or more. We need to quickly change the classical electromagnetic model to include the active vacuum and its interaction, and we need to change all textbooks to clearly state that all electromagnetic energy in the universe comes from the active vacuum, via the asymmetry of the source charges in their fierce energy exchange with it. We also need to point out that all primary electromagnetic entities, the charge, the field, the potential, and every joule of electromagnetic energy in the universe totally violates the second law of thermodynamics. The charge produces continuously increasing negentropy, the field and the potential are formed at expanding light speed across the universe and are perfectly ordered, thereby totally violating the statistical mechanics basis of the second law, and every joule of electromagnetic energy is either field energy or potential energy, and hence violates the same statistical basis of the second law. The situation is serious. Admittedly, these are strong statements highly critical of our scientific establishment's track record. But our national survival continues to be increasingly at stake. The situation is serious, and we must not continue to bury our collective heads in the sand like ostriches. We simply cannot continue to idly sit by and pontificate while other groups and nations methodically maneuver technically to cut our collective throats with advanced weapons we cannot defend against, once they find a way to get by the little nation that has been countering them for some years. Our own beloved nation may have less than 10 years and perhaps less than 3 years to survive, unless the organized scientific community is galvanized to focus its very best scientific efforts in the energetics area. So far, in truly innovative approaches to new methods for electrical energy, the U.S. scientific community is about as energetic as a sand terrapin sleeping in the tropical sun. There is no discernible move to recognize the seriousness of the problem, or to do anything effective about it. In 45 years, the asymmetry of the dipole, and the charge in its modern view as a dipolarity of special kind, has not made it across the university campus from the particle physics department to the electrical engineering department. In fact, the implication of broken symmetry to electrical engineering and classical electrodynamics seems to still be completely unnoticed by the National Academy of Sciences, the National Science Foundation, our universities, and our great national laboratories. In the scientific community, other than work on vaccines etc., it is largely business as usual. A new Manhattan Project is warranted. Our need in the energetics weapons area is extreme, as are our needs in the medical area for quick, cheap, easy, and effective portable treatment of the coming mass casualties and our coming dramatic needs in energy. We do have superb scientists with the horsepower necessary to do something about it. The astounding, independent work of Sachs, the AIAS, and a few other scientists which we stress has been unfunded already clearly proves that. But unless we change the organized scientific community's normal rather snail-like pace by a strong measure such as a presidential decision directive and a declaration of an alienal emergency, the U.S. scientific community will overshoot the point of no return now approaching. We need a new Manhattan-type project. We need it very quickly. If we do not change and focus our present scientific procedure, then all too shortly little that the scientific and intelligence communities are doing will be of value. We shall all be very, very dead, or else in a new dark ages where most of the world economy has collapsed and freedom has largely disappeared from the face of the earth. 2002 Energetics Weapons Threat to the U.S. The U.S. narrowly escaped energetics destruction twice in 1997 on two occasions in 1997, latter February and on May Day, we were scheduled in be strategically attacked without warning and completely destroyed. Eerily, in public statements the leader of the Aum Shinrikyo sect had foreshadowed the dates for the planned attacks, since his group was also involved in fact, shooting down the TWA-800 as advanced practice and stimulation of the US to see if it knew what was afoot. Those two planned strategic strikes in 1997 were avoided only in the nick of time by actions of a friendly little foreign country, which was the only nation on Earth at the time that could counter the KGB quantum potential weapons. I am sure that proper U.S. agencies intercepted my urgent personal faxes to the defense attaché in Washington, D.C. and directly to the Prime Minister of the nation involved. Actions by that nation did succeed in averting our destruction in the nick of time. Formed in 1987. Over 60,000 members. More than $1 billion in gold and cash. Taught that US would strike Japan with devastating blow in latter 1997. Was developing biological weapons anthrax, botulism, Q fever. Developed own chemical weapons. Aum Jakoza Alliance leased operational use of strategic Soviet energetics weapons in latter 1989. Trained crews, planned to strike US a terrible pre-emptive blow in 1997 by assisting KGB. Using deception, killed targets such as TWA-800. Kill of TWA Flight 800 on July 17, 1996 by Yakuza and Aum Shinrikyo. Similar streak with front glow in clouds. Electromagnetic missile glowing. Electromagnetic missile strike. Turbulent wake in clouds. Other indicators. Helicopter eyewitness to streak initial strike glow and then larger second glow. Pilot eyewitness multiple aircraft. Radar tracked non-solid blip that closed with the aircraft. Explosive ruled out. Significantly differs from downing by a flight SAM at envelope of its range. Simple mechanical failure does not fit. Second strike. An electromagnetic burst inside air conditioning explodes fumes in empty gas tank. 1985 photos of Soviet electromagnetic missiles offset from shuttle launch. 1985 eyewitness of similar electromagnetic missile strike on Aero DC-8 at Gander AFB, Newfoundland. Multiple photos of electromagnetic missile tests over Western Australia. Probable U-2 explosion. C-130 crash November 22, 96. Only 5 nations or national groups have quantum potential weapons. Though one or more additional nations are almost certainly working on them and may even have them. First of the 5 is the KGB in Russia. The weapons are not in the regular Russian forces, and never have been. Second is the friendly little foreign country to whom we presently owe our continued survival. The third is Brazil, which has had a small and successful quantum potential weapon program for some time. China deployed quantum potential weapons in early 2002, and I recently found that at least one other friendly nation has them as well. I'm not too impressed with that other friendly nation, since they played no role in saving our bacon in 1997. It appears they did not actually know the coming attacks were imminent. They certainly do not have causal system robot weapons, nor do they believe such weapons even exist. Initiation of the Brazilian energetics weapon program. Brazil implemented an energetics weapons program after it employed the repatriated Dr. Hellmann, a German scientist taken to Russia after World War II along with the German radar team. Years after being taken to Russia, Hellmann was repatriated and made his way back to Germany. In a news interview, Hellmann reported that he had worked directly on the development of Soviet secret electromagnetic weapons which could suddenly free/e large areas of the ocean surface. That of course is a scalar interferometry weapon, producing negative, converging, electromagnetic energy rather than positive, diverging, electromagnetic energy in their distant interference zones. Also, when the US made David Bohm persona non grata in the McCarthy witch hunts, Bohm was later employed in lecturing and teaching in Brazil for some time. At the time our own scientists continued to pontificate as to whether they liked or could tolerate Bohm's quantum potential and his hidden variable interpretation of quantum mechanics. Meanwhile, the KGB weapons scientists and the Brazilian Hellman project seized upon Bohm's hidden variable theory with alacrity as soon as he published his seminal paper. Those two weapon groups were already familiar with the internal longitudinal electromagnetic wave structuring of potentials, fields, and waves, Whittaker 1903, and immediately saw the fantastic weapons implications of a deliberately structured quantum potential, containing a specific engine as desired. Most of our scientists still are unaware of it to this day, and are unaware of its formidable weapon implications when combined with Whittaker's 1904 superpotential paper, his 1903 potential decomposition, and quantum field theory. Most of our scientists still adhere to the Bohr interpretation of quantum mechanics, which excludes the normal, everyday, observable, ordered universe we all inhabit and observe. The Bohm quantum potential is, after all, a scalar potential, and at least in theory it has a Whittaker bi-wave decomposition. Even in the Coulomb gauge, the scalar potential has infinite velocity, as pointed out by Jackson. Several tests of the cold explosion Russian weapons referred to by Hellman have since been openly made. One major test seen by at least 5 jetliner crews was the anomalous rapidly rising cloud and subsequent extremely huge light globe, ABM energy shield, effects off the Kurils in April 1984. Two excellent scientific articles on the physical phenomena observed in that incident are published in the prestigious journal Science. We had explained the cold explosion phenomena and the ABM energy shield effects some years before that incident. Even ordinary superpotential theory and longitudinal electromagnetic wave interferometry at a distance can substantiate the capability. We also positively confirmed by private sources that the scalar interferometry, the mind snapper, negative energy electromagnetic pulse, and the cold explosion weaponry are real. Exothermic, cold, explosion off the Kurils April 9, 1984. A second test, an expanding globe of light, was added in the exothermic mode to demonstrate rapid serial switching between weapon modes. Sequence of events. Geyser of water rose rapidly from surface, mushroomed out. Reached 60,000 feet altitude in about 2 minutes. Brilliantly glowing small globe then appeared in top of cloud. Globe increased greatly in size and altitude. Reached diameter of 380 miles. Center reached altitude of 200 miles. What they were. Superpotential interferometry using longitudinal electromagnetic waves. Cold explosion just above surface, as anti-ship anti-fleet. Similar higher density spherical shell Tesla globe for one-on-one shooting. Larger Tesla globe for large area targets such as intercontinental ballistic missiles coming in from mid-course. Use in out of atmosphere. Related phenomena. In 1969 in Toronto, Canada, Sid Hurwitz demonstrated a device capable of freezing a pistol lying on a table so that the gun could physically not be moved and the trigger could not be pulled. For this exhibition of strong electrogravitation, general relativistic fields initiated by the electromagnetic force field, including the usually unaccounted heaviside non-diverged component that Lorentz arbitrarily discarded, as the agent of space-time curvature were used. The strength of the effect was attested by the fact that the hands of the observers' watches all showed no passage of time during the half-hour they were in the room with Hurwitz's device operating. Rapid development of that strong electrogravitational technology and concomitant energetics then proceeded in another nation. Weapons of such nature were then employed by that nation a few years later, in two well-known international incidents. Clear signatures of the nature of the weaponry utilized were present in those incidents. Details of these incidents will not be included in this paper. Since the energetics weaponry already utilized special electromagnetic hidden variables, Bohm's hidden variable theory and quantum potential were directly adapted into the program to dramatically extend it into the development of quantum potential weapons. Stalin personally initiated the Soviet energetics program with the greatest urgency. While Stalin was at the Potsdam Conference, At the close of World War II, the U.S. exploded the first atomic bomb in the desert. Truman informed Stalin in general terms that a powerful new U.S. weapon had been successfully tested. Secretly, Stalin already knew of our atomic bomb progress, for he had a spy in the program. While he was still at Potsdam, he then secretly called the director of the Soviet atomic weapons program and directed a speed-up. After we exploded 2 atomic bombs on Japan, the Japanese surrendered and World War II was over. See again Figure 1. Stalin vehemently ordered his Academy of Sciences to produce the next great technical breakthrough at all possible speed, since the American atomic bomb had frustrated his plan to wait 2 years after the war while the West speedily disarmed, then march into Europe and take it in 6 weeks. Now his massed troops could just be bombed back into the Stone Age by US bombers using atomic bombs. A great technical breakthrough in physics can always be had in 4 years. The scientific community can have a great new technical breakthrough whenever its furious and dogmatic resistance to innovative discoveries or the possibility of innovative developments can be suspended. All that is necessary is a concentrated group of highly skilled, open-minded scientists, the money and facilities, and a strong headlock placed on the powerful but dogmatic scientific groups who would otherwise hamstring the program and destroy it. We proved it in the World War II Manhattan Project, where we went from nearly zilch to the operational atomic bomb in 4 years. But we did it only by secretly bypassing the conventional US scientific establishment. Einstein wrote to President Roosevelt around the scientific community, and when the president approved and ordered the highly classified program, conventional scientists not on the project were just parked on the sideline and ignored so that the job could be completed. The naysayers were also muzzled because of the extreme classification of the project. They faced jail if they engaged in their usual ad hominem attacks and dogmatic eloquence. Further, today the skunk works approach repeatedly proves that bold new projects can be done, when the skilled scientists and facilities are mobilized and no adamant opposition by the conventional community is tolerated. Numerous examples of the U.S. scientific community's suppression of innovation and new technology can easily be furnished. Such are well known to any historian of science. Cold fusion, the amorphous semiconductor by Obshinsky, the first laser papers, ultra-wideband radar, Mayer's original conservation of energy law, Boltzmann's work, Wegener's continental drift, flight of heavier-than-air machines, the rocket as a great strategic weapon, and hundreds of other examples come readily to mind. Such suppression has been the major characteristic of the organized scientific community since its inception, as pointed out by numerous leading scientists and authors. As Planck stated, usually one gets a new physics only after the old physicists who so adamantly oppose it just die off and get out of the way. Today, the U.S. scientific community is in fact our front-line troops, although except for a little lip service the managers of the organized scientific community are blissfully unaware of it and have little or no sense of mission in out-of-the-box areas with respect to national survival. It is ironical, for example, that our orthodox scientific community does not even know what powers an electromagnetic circuit energy extracted directly from the vacuum by the asymmetry of the source charge, considered in its modern view as a dipolarity, and by the source dipole. Energy extracted from the vacuum by the asymmetry of the source dipole powers every electric power line and electric circuit. Generators make dipoles. They do not add 1 watt to the attached power line. A typical example, the suppression of cold fusion. As an example, much of U.S. science dominated by nuclear factions since the advent of the atomic bomb in World War II vehemently attacked cold fusion and the cold fusion researchers, including wholesale ad hominem attacks, with a viciousness seldom seen in the history of science. Many dogmatic scientists declared the entire field at best a mistake and at worst a fraud. Even the character of many of the leading cold fusion scientists was openly impugned and the researchers were slandered and libeled. All this was done by conventional dogmatic scientists who have not solved the fundamental source charge problem. 10, 12, have no inkling that all energy in 3 space comes from the time domain, and have not a clue as to what really powers every electromagnetic circuit. Since they also do not know where the electrical energy driving the chemistry actually comes from, they have no knowledge of the effects of time energy in electrolyte solutions. They also appear to have little or no knowledge of the implications of Evans and Searle's transient fluctuation theorem in thermodynamics, showing to what degree the second law of thermodynamics can be violated and reactions can run in reverse, nor its extension to the micron, colloidal, size level and to 2 seconds in duration. If they did, then they would realize that the Coulomb barrier provided by repulsion of like charges, such as two positive hydrogen ions, often reverses into the attraction of like charges, with the barrier changing into the Coulomb attractor. This can last, by experimental proof shown by Evans et al., up to 2 seconds, in a volume of fluid up to a micron in diameter. Hence it is not against the laws of physics and thermodynamics to observe attraction of two protons in an electrolyte so closely that each enters the strong force region of the other and the two form a quasi-nucleus. In the decay of this reversal zone, the preferred decay of the quasi-nucleus can be by quark flipping in one of the protons, yielding an atom of deuterium emerging from the decayed time reversal zone. Such results have been meticulously observed in many cold fusion experiments in multiple labs and nations, and by multiple researchers. Since these and other novel nuclear transmutation results are replicated experiments, more than 600, in multiple labs, multiple nations, and by multiple researchers, it means that no amount of theory can refute them or the results. The harsh skeptics launching the frenzied ad hominem attacks are thus revealed as the unscientific bigots they are, since they ignore substantial experimental results that contradict the prevailing theory. The excess energy production and inexplicable new nuclides obtained by these multiple experimenters are completely inexplicable by ordinary nuclear interactions in the accepted theory. Fen ions time reverse in even numbers. Like charges cluster. Aqueous solutions contain positive hydrogen ions, which are just protons. Quarks flip as time reversed zone fades. Time reversal zone. Electronuclear reaction in a time reversed zone producing excess deuterium ions. As time reversed zone decays, quasi-nucleus is usually in an excited state. Decay action starts from every point in space-time inside the nucleons. Moves from inside toward outside. Strikes the nearly free quarks first. Decay occurs by easy quark flip. Quasi-nucleus transmutes to an isobar. If quasi-nucleus is a stable state in a forward time zone, no decay occurs. Electronuclear reaction in a time-reversed zone producing excess alpha particles. Meanwhile, the U.S. Patent Office has been instructed not to accept any patent applications that would interfere with present nuclear planning. Positive cold fusion results have also been successfully obtained in several U.S. government laboratories, including at China Lake, where very strange instrumental effects have the experimental team puzzled. I proposed an explanation of those anomalies in August 1998, and have included it in my book just published in September 2002. Revolutionary new processes are hidden in the cold fusion experimental results. Once understood, cold fusion holds the breathtaking key to systems that consume a tiny fraction of time flow itself as a fuel to produce copious heat energy for the world's needs. Unknown to the conventional scientists, of course, electrodynamics itself already does this, but it has just not been recognized and accepted. Transducing 1 microsecond per second of time into transverse wave electromagnetic energy will produce some 90 gigawatts of real electrical power, if all the transduced electromagnetic energy is intercepted and used. This is the real way to extract energy from the vacuum and use it cleanly and cheaply. To grasp such a notion, recall that the fundamental units used in physics are completely arbitrary. It is perfectly possible to express all physics in only a single fundamental unit, for example, the joule. Time then becomes totally a function of energy. So it is not so insane after all to express time as highly compressed energy. Mass is also highly compressed energy. That concept is now familiar after Einstein, the nuclear age, and energy equals mass times speed of light squared. Time as energy is just as straightforward as mass as energy, but it has just not yet come into recognition. The use of time as compressed energy, however, leads to some profoundly new types of electronuclear reactions presently unknown in particle physics. These new transduction reactions produce the new nuclides in cold fusion experiments, and generate the electronuclear interaction. We explain that in some detail in our new book, Energy from the Vacuum, previously cited. When interpreted as using time energy, cold fusion shows us the way to a new electronuclear regime of nuclear reactions where nuclei, elements, and compounds can just be directly assembled by comparatively weak, in terms of spatial energy, electromagnetic interactions. Presently we have made substantial progress in understanding the fundamental mechanisms generating these electronuclear reactions, after presenting preliminary results in August 1998. As one example, time reversing a single fermion, a particle with spin 1/2, 3/2, etc., is precluded by the Pauli exclusion principle. But one can time reverse two of them, or any even number n, where they act as a semi-boson or group of semi-bosons. Simply put, if a time reversal zone is established momentarily in the region where like charges exist, then the n-tuple fermion cluster can be achieved because the law of attraction and repulsion of charges is temporarily reversed. This unexpected attraction of paired fermions of like sign will form quasi-nuclei in many cases, particularly in small clusters of 2 or 4, etc. Hence two positive hydrogen ions, 2 protons, in such a time reversal zone in a fluid are drawn together into a quasi-nucleus, which actually is an excited isomer of deuterium. Time reversal zones are temporary in cold fusion experiments due to the statistics of their formation and the transient fluctuation theorem of thermodynamics. As the time reversal zone decays, the quasi-nucleus of 2 protons is increasingly in an excited and unbalanced state. The excited state diproton nucleus decays by flipping a quark in one proton, converting it to a neutron. That produces a neutron plus proton nucleus, which is a deuterium ion, strictly by electronuclear means. Or 4 protons may cluster by attraction in a time reversal zone and form a 4p nucleus. That is an excited isomer of a helium nucleus. As the time reversal zone decays, first one quark flips in one proton and then another quark flips in a second proton. That produces a helium nucleus, i.e., an alpha particle. Or 2 deuterium ions can attract and form a quasi-nucleus, which is already an exact isomer of a helium nucleus and thus easily decays into an alpha particle by simply tightening as the weakened strong force recovers faster than the Coulomb force can reduce, vanish, and resume in the opposite direction. The exact reaction equations for these reactions are given in my new book, Energy from the Vacuum. We filed an invention disclosure on the process of forming and using time reversal zones to cause like charges to attract and unlike charges to repel in vacuo, in fluids, and in other media, resulting in the formation of semi-nuclei as excited isomer states of other nuclei, followed by decay into new nuclides. We will follow it with patent applications in the future. This represents a completely new kind of particle physics interaction presently not included in the textbooks, and not requiring high-energy processes. Literally thousands of new nuclear interactions all permissibly violating the second law of thermodynamics because the statistics permit such violations and experiments prove it are now possible. Cold fusion does indeed hold a new kind of nuclear physics in its hand, but a physics presently considered very alien by our orthodox nuclear science community. For decades nuclear scientists have been seeking ever more spatially energetic particle smashing, believing that extreme high-energy nuclear reactions and transmutations cannot possibly be done with charged particles at low spatial energy. One is sympathetic to the scientists, because even the concept of low spatial energy transmutation itself sounds like an oxymoron. And it would be, if iPhone were limited to spatial energy alone, as is presently assumed by physicists. But one is also speaking of the neglected and compressed huge time energy component of those low spatial energy photons, and that is quite a different matter. The lower the spatial energy of the photon, the lower its frequency, the greater the amount of compressed energy transported in the time component as time. The transposition of time-polarized electromagnetic energy into longitudinally polarized electromagnetic energy and vice versa is already justified in quantum field theory. Use of that extremely high energy component by its transposition or partial transposition into spatial energy in fact provides a much higher energy physics interaction than present orthodox high energy physics utilizes, knows, or considers. Almost all the learned scientists are thinking only of spatial energy, since that is the only kind they have been taught to consider. Hence, from their view, i.e., on the premise of their implicit assumption, it is perfectly logical to condemn cold fusion, since in their view, cold implies low, spatial, energy and fusion implies high, spatial, energy transmutation. What is unknown to the orthodox community is that the cold in cold fusion also implies extraordinarily high time energy. So with a little transduction of highly compressed time energy into spatial energy, cold fusion actually can imply extremely high spatial energy made available by transduction also. As an example, the chief editor of Science recently had the courage to publish results of sonoluminescence research reporting positive experimental transmutation results. A paper was then published in Nature, pointing out that the spatial energy involved is insufficient for such nuclear transmutation temperature, thereby implying that the reactions reported by the first researchers are not possible. However, given formation of a time reversal zone, this second paper is not necessarily applicable to the sonoluminescence fusion process, because the paper is based on an unwitting two-part premise that one only spatial energy can be used for nuclear transmutation and two no time reversal zones exist to nullify that premise by having reactions, such as the law of attraction and repulsion of charges, run backwards. That premise is already experimentally proven to be invalid by Evans et al., and it fails when the time reversal zone effect is considered. We strongly stress that thermodynamics both in theory and as demonstrated in experiments not only allows but predicts for a certain fraction of the time the formation and existence of just such reversal zones where the usual reactions run in reverse. It is also experimentally proven. In that case a much higher energy time energy can be and is employed to convert the Coulomb barrier into the Coulomb attractor. We know now, from the experimental demonstrations by Dennis Evans et al., that such reversal zones may be up to a micron in size and may endure for up to 2 seconds. The subsequent decay of that time reversed zones then allows the quasi-nuclei temporarily formed in it to decay by quark flipping alone, allowing the quasi-nucleus to easily transmute into a perfectly well-known nuclear reaction product. To quote Arthur C. Clarke, when a learned scientist says something is possible, he is probably right. When he says something is impossible, he is probably wrong. Stalin's dictatorial impact on Soviet scientific management's response. Stalin was a powerful dictator. He simply killed or jailed those who opposed his will. So after his blunt order circa latter 1945 to find a great new technical breakthrough area quickly, his academicians and high-level science managers were faced with a severe dilemma: they could not afford to oppose or criticize a vigorous search for new innovations and a great breakthrough, and they could not remain passive. Their very lives depended on they themselves. Personally finding such a breakthrough in great haste and presenting it to Stalin, they had to actively spur the efforts of their most outstanding subordinates and Soviet science itself, or suffer dire personal consequences. Siberia and prison camps loomed for the lot of them unless they produced. To put it bluntly, Stalin got their collective attention and their wholehearted support. Those few who resisted simply were shipped post-haste to the notorious prisons of Siberia, and worked to death in short order. So the highest-level Soviet scientific managers now desperately demanded of their subordinate scientists anything at all that was novel and had breakthrough implications. An almost convulsive national scientific effort was launched immediately, with hardly a detracting voice. A great team of the very best Soviet scientists was rapidly formed and methodically searched the scientific literature of the world from beginning to end. Nothing even remotely like that search and review has ever occurred in the West. For example, one great technical center set up by the Soviets had a staff of about 2,000 PhDs with associated translators, staffs, etc. The Soviets purchased and hauled in copies of all the scientific literature of the West by the shiploads to such centers. Their scientists then methodically went through the material, journal by journal, paper by paper, page by page. There are and always have been myriads of innovations and discoveries sitting on the shelf in the scientific literature, never followed up, or opposed by standard models and credos. The first tier of reviewing Soviet scientists was composed of excellent scientists. They schemed out the cream into a select pile which the second tier then analyzed in depth. The second tier was composed of the best nonlinear scientists in the world, the super scientists. They were seeking new principles of nature that could rapidly be developed into highly advanced technology, and they found them sitting there in the literature, already pointed out, and long ignored by the Western scientific community. Shortly Stalin had his great new breakthrough area emerging, and they had their heads. Our own science communities progressed during these decades. For decades foundations physicists, Bungay, Feynman, Wheeler, Lindsay, Margina, etc., in the US have repeatedly pointed out the substantial foundations problems in electrodynamics. Nobelist Feynman and the great John Wheeler tried to fix the problem whereby electrodynamics still erroneously assumes force fields in a space filled with a material ether, unit point positive charge, unit point north pole, and unit point mass assumed at every point in space. Unfortunately they failed, primarily because their absorber theory contradicted the photon hypothesis and hence quantum mechanics. Meanwhile, our own National Science Foundation and National Academy of Sciences has directed only minimal work on correcting electrodynamics and dramatically extending it. Faraday and Maxwell, as did every other scientist at the time, rigorously assumed a material ether. Maxwell's equations also implicitly included that material ether assumption. They still do, even after Heaviside's truncation and Lorenz's symmetrical Riga-Eugene, because none of the Maxwell-Heaviside equations were changed to eliminate the material fields in space, material ether, assumption after the Michelson-Morley experiments falsified it. Every major university in America still teaches that implicit material ether, even though it was falsified over a century ago. That is an exact measure of the caliber of foundations work our own scientific community does if left alone. In more than 100 years, they have not even chosen to root out the material ether from electrodynamics. This polluted and suffering planet. Direct result of the scientific community's adamant resistance to upgrading classical electrodynamics and electrical engineering. The prevailing flippant attitude is that, well, your TV set works, doesn't it? Yes, it does, but we also do not have practical electrogravitation and inertial propulsion, nor do we have cheap clean electromagnetic energy from the vacuum. Instead, we have a severely polluted planet, ever-increasing deaths from biospheric fumes and polluting byproducts, increasing destruction of species, and a monstrous unleashing of far more coal and hydrocarbon burning in our near future while the world tears itself apart and destroys its economy and civilization in a rising series of oil and energy wars. The direct responsibility for that mess lies directly with the scientific community and its fierce resistance to innovative research and development, and changing a century-old, long outmoded classical electromagnetic and electrical engineering model. Riley put, "It's high time we got the lead out of electromagnetic field theory, where the lead is the material ether and other non sequiturs cluttering the theory." Such drastic modeling errors would not be tolerated of government-funded aerospace engineers and contractors developing a new missile system. So it should be equally intolerable in the government-funded scientific community and in fact in the civilian scientific community as well, and it should not be tolerated of either the National Academy of Sciences or the National Science Foundation. Einstein said it perfectly, as follows. The scientist makes use of a whole arsenal of concepts which he imbibed practically with his mother's milk, and seldom if ever is he aware of the eternally problematic character of his concepts. He uses this conceptual material, or, speaking more exactly, these conceptual tools of thought, as something obviously, immutably given, something having an objective value of truth which is hardly even, and in any case not seriously, to be doubted. In the interests of science it is necessary over and over again to engage in the critique of these fundamental concepts, in order that we may not unconsciously be ruled by them. Upholding and perpetuating flawed electrodynamics models seriously impedes the progress of scientific development and revolutionary new technology. At some point, one must legitimately question the upper management of the U.S. scientific community for not modifying classical electromagnetics and electrical engineering to include the active vacuum exchange with every charge and electromagnetic system. In not doing so, they continue to advocate perpetual motion source charges, creating energy from nothing, on a scale unparalleled in history. It is little wonder that we do not have electrical power systems that successfully and freely utilize more than a trillionth of the vacuum energy they freely extract from the local vacuum. There is not now and there never has been a single electrical engineering department, professor, or textbook that knows what actually powers an electromagnetic circuit: real observable electromagnetic energy extracted from the local seething vacuum by the source charges and the source dipolarity. Since our scientific community cannot seem to make such a simple change, as including the active vacuum's interaction with every charge and the charge's broken symmetry in that interaction, even 45 years after the basis for that change has been resoundingly proven in particle physics, our national survival is at stake and the nation itself is seriously threatened by the superweapons developed by the KGB over the last 5 decades. We would have already been totally destroyed twice in 1997 alone had it not been for the intervention of a friendly little foreign nation. My colleagues and I played a very small alerting role in those affairs, so we are speaking from experience, not from extrapolation. We would be quickly destroyed today, were it not for the continuing balance of terror provided by the little nation. U.S. scientists have committed monstrous crimes and gone unpunished. Rather sadly, we also point out another thing that has to be said: scientists are no more moral or immoral than any other slice of American citizens. A percentage of scientists is capable of committing horrible scientific crimes, as distasteful as such a statement may be. That includes the deliberate experimentation on humans, resulting in deaths. In short, at least manslaughter and perhaps even murder, since knowledge of the probable results was there beforehand. One would think U.S. scientists would never scientifically condone and perform experiments leading to mass deaths for 30 years, as they did in the Tuskegee case in Alabama. Over 400 poor blacks were supposedly treated for syphilis, while actually not being treated at all, but were deliberately tricked and allowed to rot with syphilis so our ethical scientists could watch how their brains decayed, so to speak. Over 100 of those poor blacks died with the disease while the scientists cold-bloodedly watched them expire and kept meticulous records. Or, 2, as they did in the case of whole-body nuclear radiation for 30 years, again by trickery, deceit, and illegal use of security classification to hide these acts of helpless retarded children and others, some of whom also died. Once these heinous incidents were exposed publicly, the political power of the scientific community is such that no scientist was ever indicted or treated for these heinous mass murders, and none is going to be. The scientific community has not fiercely called for punishment of these mass murderers amongst their midst guilty of precisely the same kind of horrible actions for which we tried and executed war criminals at Nuremberg. Incredibly, the President of the United States formally apologized for these incidents. He did not turn the case over to the Justice Department for prosecution of high crimes against humanity and mass murder, as would have been done for ordinary citizens. Had a single doctor in his private clinic done such things on his own, he would have been arrested, summarily tried, and either sentenced to life in prison or executed. The sad thing is that there was really no sharp clamor from the scientific community to bring their fellow scientists to justice, a la Nuremberg. By their silence, the organized scientific community showed a side that scientists are loftily not supposed to possess. So long as the scientific community continues to tolerate those mass murders of American citizens and not call for justice, then just so long do they stand convicted by their own resounding silence and inaction. We cite these painful incidents, there are others, to point out that one must not deify the scientific community. The conduct of science is no better and no worse than the conduct of human affairs in other areas. Science is also a big business, and it has its moral scientists and its immoral scientists. It does its moral business and it does its immoral business. We painfully submit that both sides of the scientific character must be considered, when one examines such things as the tolerance or intolerance of the scientific community to dramatic innovation and out-of-box research. We have to consider it now, because it has become a serious threat to the continued survival of our nation. The conduct of scientific affairs will unavoidably include suppression, maneuvering, spin control, and fierce struggle for power and funds, such is in the very nature of human beings, and it is present in the scientific community on a bell-shaped curve as in all other human communities. It is ongoing widely today, and to an uncomfortably large extent much of science has been captured and effectively controlled by controlling the scientific funding and prescribing what research must be done for the funds available. As the French say, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Science is still the same way as it was when Planck made his famous statement. It will still be that way tomorrow, and a century from now. As with any other big enterprise, it has to have checks and balances imposed and enforced on it from outside by the government itself. Little or no indication exists of that happening in the near future, until we get something like an anthrax spray attack on a large city, and have 1 million or more Americans dying in the streets. Energetics, new principles of physics and how the Soviets found them. Under Stalin's whip, the Soviets particularly sought anything that indicated possible new principles of nature. It is no accident that Nobelist Petr Kapitsa later informed Nikita Khrushchev that a means of total neutralization of foreign missiles could only come from a group of new principles in physics called energetics. A group of new principles is precisely what energetics is. So if our scientific and intelligence communities wish to understand energetics, they must first understand the new principles it is based upon. They cannot just simply apply ordinary electrodynamics and business as usual as they have largely done. The massive Soviet scientific search program spurred by Stalin is where those new principles came from. When the first tier of Soviet review scientists found something that had not been followed up, and saw that it had significant implications if found valid, that paper was laid aside into a select pile. That select pile then went to the super scientists, for full-blown review and analysis by some of the brightest and sharpest minds on the planet. The Russians came up almost immediately with Whittaker's 1903 and 1904 work. That work shows a hidden electrodynamic longitudinal electromagnetic wave pair structure, in phase conjugate pairs, inside the scalar potential and comprising it. This is a dramatic extension of electrodynamics to incorporate a full info-LD general relativity info-LD inside the electrodynamics. Whittaker showed that scalar potential functions in interference already create all the normal fields and waves anyway, the beginning of superpotential theory. This novel interferometry and its inherent capability for action at a distance did not elude the Russian super scientists. The superb Soviet scientific team came up with that and with much more. Nothing like the comprehensive, intense review of the entire scientific literature has been accomplished by the U.S. scientific community. Nothing like it is being done now. Longitudinal electromagnetic wave interferometry energetics was almost immediately uncovered at the end of World War II. The German radar team and infrared team were taken to Russia. Both teams were years ahead of their Western counterparts. One of my close colleagues has validated that the German radar team had some severe instrumental anomalies while still in Germany. We think this is what they were. In World War II the Germans invented radar-absorbing materials, to coat their submarine snorkels and prevent Allied anti-submarine warfare bombers from tracking the snorkels and destroying the subs. A wide variety of highly nonlinear, doped materials were investigated. In addition to single-beam radar across-section, the Germans also examined the materials in multi-beam illumination circumstances. It appears that, in some multi-beam experiments with some materials, conditions were just right so that the multi-illuminated absorbing material acted as a pumped phase conjugate mirror, and wave-to-wave interactions emerged. This meant that the absorber material phase conjugated mirror would suddenly gather up all the energy in the pumping beams, use one of the other beams as a signal input beam, and fire an amplified retroreflected pulse right back down the signal input beam, wrecking the experiment and creating havoc in surrounding equipment. When the German radar team went to Russia, their knowledge of these anomalies went with them. In the desperate Russian scientific climate to find such anomalies, this startling and anomalous phenomenon would have been exhaustingly examined and studied, once the German radar engineers got to Russia to their new laboratories. In short, it appears that the Russians quickly came up with what today is called nonlinear phase conjugate optics, but first in the radar band rather than optics 24. So before 1950, it appears that the Russians already had working phase conjugating pumped phase conjugate mirrors for the radar bands and in other bands. Fisher details that we Americans did not stumble onto practical phase conjugate optics experiments until Russian physicists briefed Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory scientists in 1972 about the strange wave in many of their optical experiments that came out of nowhere and restored order from disorder. At that time, the KGB energetics weapons scientists had known about phase conjugate retroreflection and its amplified pumping, for more than 20 years. Indeed, the first giant strategic scalar interferometers had already been deployed and utilized to kill the USS Thresher nearly a decade earlier. By 1950 Russian energetics was off and running. By the beginning of the 1950s, the Russian scientists under Iran KGB control were already experimenting with scalar potential interferometry at a distance, a la Whittaker 1904. Here transverse electromagnetic waves, electromagnetic fields, and electromagnetic energy either divergent, heating, positive energy or convergent, cooling, negative energy could be readily created at a distance. Further, the longitudinal electromagnetic wave pairs used in this interferometry had the marvelous characteristic of easily penetrating right through the Earth and ocean, with only a little intervening interaction, given that the LWs are sufficiently well made. The interferometry beams can and do also move superluminally again, right through the Earth and ocean. Scalar interferometry in the endothermic, cooling, mode. Meeting of timed pulses causes explosive cooling. Heat emerges at transmitter and receiver. Cooling at interference zone. Ambient vacuum potential in distant interference zone. It is not accidental that Admiral Gorshkov, head of the Soviet Navy, would later bluntly state, "We have made the oceans of the world transparent." And so they had. Scalar interferometry in the exothermic, heating, mode. Energy input to transmitter-receiver. Electrical ground potential of transmitter. Heating in interference zone. Meeting of timed pulses causes explosive heating. Ambient vacuum potential in distant interference zone. By 1950, the Russian scientists were experimenting with deliberately creating and phase conjugating longitudinal electromagnetic waves, forming phase conjugate wave pairs. They then assembled the desired, mathematically calculated, sets of those waves, adjusted frequencies and magnitudes, phasing, etc., to produce electromagnetic potentials having a desired deterministic internal space-time curvature set, internal space-time engines, and dynamics. As a result, by the mid-50s Russian weapons scientists were already experimenting in bioenergetics with the direct inductance of diseases and health changes via the transmission into human targets of such internally structured electromagnetic potentials, fields, and waves. They were also experimenting with the production of electromagnetic energy, potentials, fields, and waves at a distance, directly through the Earth and the ocean. Either heating, energy flow divergence, or cooling, energy flow reconvergence, could be produced at will in the distant interference zone, merely by altering the bias voltage on the chassis grounds of the interferometer's transmitters. Rapid switching between the exothermic and endothermic modes thus was straightforward, as demonstrated. By the latter 50s, longitudinal wave interferometry weapons had already emerged from advanced engineering development and were in full production engineering toward deployment. The LIDA device and even more advanced versions for directly affecting the human mind and its state of consciousness had emerged in psychoenergetics as one class of devices rather openly released and utilized. The LIDA uses structured electromagnetic microwaves to induce a hypnagogic or cataleptic type of trance-like state in either a human or a cat. As tested years later by Dr. Ross Adey of the U.S. Early prototypes were purportedly used against our prisoners in North Korea during the Korean War to assist in their brainwashing by their North Korean captors. Prisoners reported that its effects were irresistible. Meanwhile, energetics weapon testing in several major modes was being conducted, particularly from Soviet research ships over remote regions of the ocean and at night. Descriptions of such tests, many of them seen by passing ships' captains, can readily be found in the open maritime literature. We gathered and published many such incidents and cited references. Deployment of the Soviet energetics weapons and their quick use. In January 1960, Khrushchev spoke obliquely of these fantastic new superweapons, just within the portfolio of the Soviet scientists, so to speak, in an important speech to the Presidium. Parts of that speech were reported in the New York Times. No one in the West knew what Khrushchev was talking about. Our intelligence community, which bases many of its assessments on the tired old phrase "we have no evidence that," simply treated it as propaganda. It wasn't, and the USS Thresher was to be destroyed 3 years later by that same weapon Khrushchev was speaking of. Khrushchev began rapidly inserting long-range missiles and nuclear warheads into Cuba in 1962, precipitating the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy knew Khrushchev's strategic bombers and rockets were in horrible shape, due to direct information received from Colonel Oleg Penkovsky, a Russian spy in our employ courtesy of British intelligence. No one knew of the superweapons, but they were not yet operationally ready in November 1962. So Kennedy called Khrushchev's bluff and faced him off. Blustering a while to obtain U.S. assurance that it would not invade Cuba, Khrushchev was forced to back down and withdraw the missiles. In his exuberance, he had simply moved too fast in inserting the missiles into Cuba. Had he waited a few months later, the strategic superweapons would have been operational and ready. Any U.S. naval blockading force would have thus faced quick and eerie destruction or disabling, as was soon to be demonstrated in the case of the USS Thresher and its surface companion, the USS Skylark. This severe loss of face by Khrushchev, before the Communist Party, made it imperative that he do something quite dramatic to stay in power, and do it as quickly as possible. Khrushchev's first large, full-up, strategic longitudinal electromagnetic wave energetics interferometer weapon became operational on site by April 1, 1963. A few days later, Khrushchev employed it to kill the USS Thresher atomic submarine underwater off the east coast of the U.S. by simply creating electromagnetic noise in an interference zone placed on, in, and around the sub underwater, and thus jamming the sub's electrical controls so that it could not be controlled. The helpless sub sank to crush depth and imploded. The USS Skylark on the surface had multiple systems seriously jammed or rendered non-operational. This was the Russian deception plan, to have the kill of the sub resemble an accident. One day after the successful clandestine kill of the Thresher, the same weapon was used to demonstrate a powerful underwater electromagnetic burst 100 miles north of Puerto Rico. The energetics underwater burst equaled a substantial deep underwater nuclear explosion in size. The burst was seen by a passing U.S. jetliner crew and was reported to the FBI and the U.S. Coast Guard when the aircraft landed in Florida. A colleague interviewed the co-pilot of the aircraft, and relayed the interview information to me. Khrushchev's second demonstration. Deep underwater electromagnetic explosion April 11, 1963, similar to this photo set of a deep underwater nuclear test explosion. Phenomena observed and reported by passing United States jetliner. 100 miles north of Puerto Rico, over Puerto Rican Trench, one of the deepest parts of the ocean. Deep underwater nuclear burst, demonstrating same water phenomenology produced by Khrushchev's second demonstration on April 11, 1963, the day after killing the USS Thresher. Why the Soviets could continue to attack and kill U.S. targets with impunity. Ironically, Khrushchev clearly demonstrated the inability of U.S. science to comprehend the numerous test incidents of Soviet longitudinal wave interferometers, including the actual destruction of strategic U.S. targets, our latest and greatest nuclear attack submarine, right off our coast. The greatest strategic weakness of the U.S. and thing that may yet completely destroy Alophus is the continuing snail-like pace of U.S. scientific progress in revising, correcting, and extending its seriously flawed classical electrodynamics model. This scientific inertia placed us several decades behind in development of defenses in the areas of longitudinal electromagnetic wave weapons, quantum potential weapons, and causal system weapons. It countered our strategic nuclear armada for 2 decades. We were for some time analogous to the Spanish Navy with its wooden ships, when it faced and was destroyed by American steel ships. Hopefully at least some more modern work has now been accomplished in higher group symmetry electrodynamics, so that we are not quite as defenseless as we formerly were. But we still have a very long way to go. When one performs a standard strategic analysis on a nation, one of the areas examined in depth is called national style. One of major characteristics in the U.S. national style is that we do not react to slowly increasing threats or changes. That style particularly applies to the scientific community. Because of it, the Russians knew that our government only inches forward in achieving new basic science. We run at enormous speed, doing applied science. We are essentially Romans and great engineers. We are largely not Greeks and not great aesthetics discoverers. We also will just ignore new threats if they emerge very slowly and are only gradually perceived, and we will hide behind that infamous phrase, "We have no evidence that." America's national style, we do not react to slowly increasing threats. In short, we react to the coiled rattlesnake, not to the boa constrictor. We are now in a long, bloody, costly war against terrorism because of that very characteristic of our national style. For decades, the slowly increasing infiltration of terrorists and their weapons was just ignored. Oh, yes, the official threat studies pointed it out, placidly. But no one got very excited about it. The prevailing attitude was that yes, but nothing like that will happen on my watch. As clearly demonstrated by their successful decades-long radiation of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, the KGB chess masters knew that, if the test kills using their superweapons were not too often repeated, and if they even vaguely resembled other things known in the world, the U.S. scientific community and government investigators would resist all suggestions of Russian superweapons and super technology using new principles of nature. And so would our intelligence community, since they rely on the scientific community for their scientific assessments. They were well aware of our historical ostrich position. The only energy resource problem is the theoretical ostrich problem in science. We must become theoretical owls, rather than ostriches. Every dipole in the universe is a continuous free electromagnetic energy generator, continuously extracting and pouring out enormous electromagnetic energy from the active local vacuum. The KGB deception just depended upon the US tiger to keep its stripes and exhibit its normal reactions or lack thereof. They also utilized, 1. A series of strategic deception plans, deliberately designed to perform the tests suggestive of discredited phenomena such as UFO reporting and lights at night types of things, and, 2. A continuing series of subtle and anomalous stimuli, probes, designed to rather slowly attract the attention of U.S. government at high levels, and of state-of-the-art U.S. government scientific contractors as well. The trick was not to attract U.S. attention too suddenly or too strongly. Show them the slow boa constrictor, not the lightning-fast rattler, and see how they reacted, if at all. By their reactions, the KGB could assess whether or not the US government, intelligence, and scientific communities understood what was happening. Precisely as anticipated by the KGB, we showed them for some decades that we really had little or no comprehension of the superweapons and their testing right over our heads. Even today, at least in the open community, there is still little recognition, even of the violent weather war raging right over our own heads since July 4, 1976, and easily recognized. A case in point was the deliberate induction of diseases and health changes in U.S. personnel in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow for over 40 years. On a continuing basis, this excellent intelligence probe showed, by the US's actions or lack thereof, that we knew nothing about energetics. Another KGB probe method was to kill a target once in a while, such as a jetliner or a submarine, deliberately rather seldom here, because the US military would react if a certain frequency threshold were exceeded. Such kills resemble or can be posed as natural accidents or terrorist incidents. Quite a number of such incidents have occurred over the last 3 decades. The National Transportation Safety Board does not have higher group symmetry electrodynamics in its knowledge base or on its checklists, nor does it have scalar interferometry, psychoenergetics, bioenergetics, or quantum potentials. In total, the results of deliberate stimuli of the US continually assured the KGB chess masters, with 100% certainty, that we were a complete novice in the energetics game, and we were a lamb increasingly ready for the slaughter. The major contribution to the continued success of these deliberate measures by the KGB has been provided for decades in the non-reaction of our own scientific community to slowly increasing threats. To a lesser extent, our own intelligence community has also not focused sufficiently open-minded and highly qualified scientists to comprehend what is occurring in new principles of nature phenomena. In the box, electrical engineers with Bachelor of Science degrees often are the analysts who analyze and assess such out-of-the-box phenomena. Good luck. Ordinary radar engineers may analyze an ordinary radar rather well. They will never become aware of a radar beam carrying info-LD'd space-time curvature engines. Such is not even in their lexicon or in their belief structure. They have no understanding or experience at all with longitudinal or time-polarized electromagnetic waves. Most have never even heard of time-polarized M waves. Mention curvatures of space-time and their dynamics as deliberate engines impressed inside electromagnetic fields and potentials and waves, and one gets a glaze right over the eyes of the intelligence analyst recipient. Western science conceives the mind as a meat computer, and does not understand that mind operations are totally electromagnetic and causal, but non-physical, meaning in the time domain rather than in 3-space. Mind operations primarily use time-polarized electromagnetic waves rather than the transductions into transverse electromagnetic waves that the scientists actually measure. Hence Western science has not the foggiest notion as to what Russian psychoenergetics is all about, or how it can even be. Certainly Western science has had no notion of deliberately creating time-polarized electromagnetic waves for direct engineering within the mind itself and within the mind's time electromagnetic operations. As Arthur C. Clarke puts it in his third law, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Our long fascination with our normal, optics, IR, UV, radar, COMINT, satellite photography, etc., technological intelligence collection systems will certainly not lead to any great breakthrough understanding of Russian energetics weaponry. That could only have come through HUMINT or COMINT. HUMINT is an area which, in the past, we have mostly just neglected or given lip service to for decades, and that came back to bite us severely on September 11, 2001. Even when we use HUMINT, it will not yield energetics results if the managers and directors themselves, and the agent handlers in the field, have no understanding of it and do not even know the proper questions to ask. And the system will not deliver results if the intelligence collection requirements do not address the proper issues, because ordinary electrical engineers and conventional electrical physicists, having no inkling of psychoenergetics, or how it works, drew them up. COMINT, on the other hand, suffers from its own extraordinary prolific output, as well as by only conventional analysts and conventional scientists examining it. Warehouses of COMINT information often have not even been read in any way except a casual glance by a junior analyst, and certainly have not had serious foundation scientists examine it in detail. ELENT does a little better insofar as a human analyst looking at it, but then what is a conventional electrical engineer or radar engineer to make of a giant hemispherical globe that slowly forms and expands from a tiny seed bubble of intense glowing light that appears, figure 35, as it did off the Kuriles in April 1984? What will he label it? Light phenomena. Where are the technical descriptors of the actual process forming the phenomenon? Where are the implications as to the strategic military use of such phenomena? The reader can see the point. For decades our analysts ignored prolific reports of such incidents by the hundreds. Why, everybody knew it was glowing swamp gas. One cannot even write a proper intelligence collection requirement if one does not understand the basic phenomenology. So essentially no one in US intelligence was writing the proper intelligence collection requirements. The science behind the Soviet energetics weapons. The science behind these weapons is called energetics. Energetics consists of three branches, depending upon the nature of what is being targeted. The branch targeted against non-living matter is just called the same name, energetics. Targeted against living cells and biological material, the nervous system, etc., that branch of energetics is called bioenergetics. Against the mind and its functions, which are time-like and thus involve scalar photons and time-polarized M waves, energetics is called psychoenergetics. Psychoenergetics includes both the conscious and unconscious mind of the individual and even Jung's collective unconscious mind of the entire human species, and in fact even the collective unconscious mind in all species on Earth, which corresponds to Lovelock's Gaia concept. Mind levels are subject to engineering by higher group symmetry electromagnetic, psychoenergetic, weapons. We remind the reader that we are talking physics, not metaphysics and not mysticism. Strong Soviet physics developments over a sustained period have occurred in all three energetics areas, and these areas continue to be developed at present. Once a nation enters into longitudinal wave electromagnetic development, it has just entered into unified field theory development also. Particularly with longitudinal M waves, one is directly engineering general relativity itself, and space-time itself, as well as the dynamics of space-time curvatures and sets of such curvatures. But it is an even greater unified field theory than Western physicists suspect. Not only does it unite the four forces of physics, but it also unites mind and matter and their dynamics as well. We shall also refer to time-polarized M waves as time-density waves. The reason is that a time-polarized M wave is one where the electromagnetic energy is on the time axis and oscillating along it, like the squeezing of an accordion. In short, it is a longitudinal electromagnetic wave on the fourth Minkowski axis ICT, where the only variable is t. Hence it is a wave of the variation of time density along that axis. All three branches of KGB energetics use longitudinal electromagnetic waves, longitudinal electromagnetic wave interferometry, and Whittaker structuring of fields and waves to provide organized curvatures of spacetime known as spacetime engines or vacuum engines. They also use time-polarized electromagnetic waves, as mentioned above. Any or all can also employ the quantum potential as well as negative energy electromagnetic pulse aspects. For now, the reader should just recognize that each info-LD longitudinal electromagnetic wave pair comprising the scalar potential, includes both a time density wave along the time axis and a longitudinal electromagnetic wave in 3 space. So ordinary electrostatic scalar potential Fe ordinary voltage is made of a harmonic structure of coupled time-polarized and longitudinal electromagnetic wave pairs. Oscillations of time density oscillate the local rate of flow of time. In turn, since time has the energy density of mass, its spatial energy equivalence W is given by energy equals speed of light squared multiplied by time. Any change in a time density wave is a very powerful oscillation of LOCA1 space-time curvature. So time density waves constitute a very powerful form of info-LD general relativity, inside potentials and hence inside all electromagnetic waves and fields. The KGB weapons scientists call that inner general relativity, time density waves, the information content of the field. Unfortunately, our follows confuse that term with common spectral analysis, which it very definitely is not. But as part of the deception plan, the Russians are quite happy to help them think it is exactly that, and in fact the Russians go to some pains to continue to help our fellows think that. KGB energetics involves the use of a highly structured general relativity info-LD inside electrodynamics inside electromagnetic potentials, fields, and waves regardless of type. In addition, that very special gross is using the very strong electromagnetic force along the time axis as the main agent of curvature. By deliberately structuring these time-polarized electromagnetic waves and their dynamics, extremely powerful space-time curvature engines can be employed, either created locally or at a real distance, or also globally in an entire selected distant region. Once these space-time curvature engines structure the distant targeted space-time region, then in that interference zone the engines therein act upon any mass present. In theory, any physical effect known can be engineered, according to general relativity, once one can create and utilize the proper set of space-time curvatures, the proper set of space-time curvatures and their dynamics. In general relativity, curvature of space-time acts directly upon any mass present, and vice versa. With such technology one can therefore engineer mass to any level and at any distance, and eventually in any quantity, at will, using energetics methodology. The engineered mass may be either living or inert. It follows that bioenergetics and psychoenergetics effects can also be engineered at a distance in similar manner. All it requires is the proper engines for the effects desired in the targets desired. By using time density waves and their dynamics, mind itself can be engineered and controlled at a distance, as in the cases of Captain's Button and Svoboda. The importance of scalar photons and time density waves. Now we digress momentarily. Again, there are four major photon polarizations in quantum field theory. The first two are transverse photons, polarized in the x and y direction respectively, transversely to the line of propagation, which is customarily taken along the z-axis. Ordinary transverse electromagnetic waves are comprised of such photons or blends thereof. Though ignored, electromagnetic waves prior to interaction with mass do transport electromagnetic time energy as well as electromagnetic spatial energy, though in electrodynamics that time energy transport has been ignored, thus confusing the effect with the cause. The third polarization is a longitudinal photon, vibrating along the z direction, the direction of propagation. Obviously, longitudinal electromagnetic waves are comprised of such longitudinal electromagnetic photons. The fourth polarization is a scalar photon, since it oscillates only along the time axis. The word scalar refers to the fact that it has no vector field component in space. In American physics, the latter photon is largely ignored since time is not an observable in quantum mechanics. However, such scalar photons do comprise time density waves and electromagnetic time energy currents, and they are involved in powerfully curving space-time via oscillating the time domain. Hence, by their oscillations they produce space-time curvature oscillations, which in turn project small components into space. Sufficient such coherent projection components are in fact longitudinal waves in space. The combination of the scalar and longitudinal photons is observable as the instantaneous scalar potential, and when Whittaker's 1903 decomposition of the scalar potential is slightly corrected, then the scalar potential is comprised of coupled pairs of waves, where each pair consists of a time-polarized electromagnetic wave coupled to a longitudinal electromagnetic wave. The combination of the scalar and longitudinal M waves in the presence of charge is observable as the macroscopic scalar potential. Negative charge absorbs the time-polarized photon from the time domain and re-emits a longitudinal photon in space, while the positive charge absorbs a longitudinal photon from 3-space and re-emits a time-polarized photon in the time domain. Psychoenergetics, engineering the mind-matter interaction by engineering mind. We shall be interested in what actually constitutes a living biological system in the psychoenergetics view. Mind operations are time-like rather than existing in 3-space, and for that reason mind and its operations are not observable. Observation is a time change operator acting on an LLLT ongoing interaction, which removes the T and leaves a frozen LLL snapshot, via changing in time, LLLT, LLL. Imposition of observation itself breaks any and all connection with time-like operations, including mind and its operations. A living biological system, psychoenergetics view. The body's cells and their parts are linked by a mutual quantum potential. Mind and thought from a mind world occupy the internal scalar wave-by-wave structure of the quantum potential to that body, being continually disconnected and reconnected by the photon interaction generatrix for the flow of time. All potentials in the body are associated with and connected to the quantum potential. The brain and nervous system are special tuners switchers between inner and outer electromagnetic signals. Deep control is via vacuum engines, nested structuring of the scalar wave zone by wave S inside, and comprising the scalar potentials. Dynamics involves velocity, and in general relativity's four-dimensional space velocity is rotation. Enemind operation or change is dynamics and produces a small velocity, which is a small rotation. This projects a very small component into 3-space, in the physical body, but still in the virtual state. We are speaking of physics rather than metaphysics. Sufficient coherent mind operations, changes, have just such small, virtual, rotation components in 3-space that will project coherent little projection components, virtual, into 3-space. Coherently sustaining these components, intent, results in their coherent integration to breach the quantum threshold and become detectable, produce an observable 3-space result. That is how an intent change sustained in the mind becomes an actual physical energy input to the body and nervous system. An object moving with velocity less than that of light has rotated slightly out of 3-dimensional space toward the time dimension. Its projection back into 3-dimension space is shorter, providing the Lorentz-Fitzgerald contraction. When velocity approximates speed of light, a full right-angle turn has been made, and the object has lost its projection along its direction of motion. Hence it appears as a 2-dimensional plane moving at the speed of light, in short, a photon of light wave. We again stress that the scalar potential is comprised of coupled time density and longitudinal electromagnetic wave pairs. Mental operations also are time density wave changes, hence they are changes to the interior of potentials, including the ambient potential of the vacuum itself. Potentials superpose, and their coherent internal structures integrate, coherently. Hence, mind changes can coherently integrate to produce minute but real, observable, physical input changes to the body system. Mind permeates the body via the interlinked and superposed potentials of the body. The living bioorganism's mind and its operations can be modeled as an organized operating wave dynamics inside a scalar potential and superposed potentials of the body of that organism. Since fields are made from the more fundamental potentials, these operations also function inside the fields of the body. The organized time-density dynamics constitute both the conscious mind and its operations and the unconscious mind and its operations. More subtle depths of the time-density dynamics also constitute the human collective unconscious mind functions and operations. Again, we are speaking physics, not mysticism. The component projection, coherent integration, process from time-like mind operations into 3-space in the body potentials introduces into the living body the physical commands correlated to the mental intent of that entity. This is the solution to the long unresolved philosophical problem of intent, and addresses the unresolved physics problem of just what constitutes the observer. But the subsequent physical changes accomplished by the responding body as a servo mechanism, also produce small rotations into the time domain, into the mind domain, but in the virtual state. However, a series of coherent physical changes produces coherent virtual state changes in the mind realm, which in turn coherently integrate into perceptual input. In this fashion, the mind senses the response of the body to its order, and any errors in that response that need correction. The time delay gives also the sense of identity and personal persistence, hence creates the perception of self, the responding body belonging to self, etc. Interwoven perceptions of coherent rotation changes from other three space phenomena that do not respond to mind intent, also create the perception of the separate physical world. That these phenomena do not respond directly to mental intent creates the perception of the separateness of this external physical world, while the interweaving creates the perception of existing simultaneously with or in the external world. Any change in the spatial body-brain produces a tiny coherent change in the time dimensions and hence in mind. Any change in the time-like mind produces a tiny coherent change in three-dimensional space and hence in the brain-body. A senses of coherent intent-induced body changes integrates to an observable input. All of that perception, dynamics, rotation, and processing is subject to direct engineering via psychoenergetics means. Without further elaboration, we again stress that the conscious mind is a serial processor, whereas the unconscious is a massively parallel processor. Westerners are prone to equate self to consciousness or conscious mind operation alone. That is not the case. Consciousness is just one attribute of the self, of the total feedback loop having delay between feed-forward and feedback. The totality is the mind-body coupling mechanism enabling a living biological system. By using time-density waves formed of scalar photons, the mind realm also can be directly engineered by the same energetics technology. Hence, for the Russian energetics weapon scientists there followed the development of psychoenergetics as an entire class of breakthrough electromagnetic weaponry. This resulted in the development of not only a unified physics of matter and space, but also a unified physics of mind and matter reaction. Any true unified field theory must integrate the observer and the unobserved as well as the various categories of the observed. It is now possible to directly model and engineer both physical and mental reality and their interaction. Russian psychoenergetics has been developed to do precisely this. Quantum potential weapons are utilized in all three energetics branches. In addition to scalar interferometers, there is another category of energetics weapons used in all three branches. That category involves the use of quantum potential weapons, after David Bohm's quantum potential in his hidden variable interpretation of quantum mechanics, published in Physical Review in 1952. We openly published one mechanism for creating a quantum potential, there are others. Presently these quantum potential weapons are the most powerful and most flexible weapons on Earth. Nothing else can stand against them. Any nation not possessing quantum potential weapons is already a second-rate power, regardless of how many nuclear missiles, bombers, and submarines it possesses, or how many high-energy lasers and high-power microwave weapons it possesses. The greatest problem the Soviets had was not in making the quantum potential itself, but in a. localizing its creation to the specific area or region desired, and b. restricting its coupling to the type of equipment, entity, level, size, type of nuclei, etc. that was desired. We have not yet fully solved the problem of how they are able to do that, but have made a little progress upon it. The importance of longitudinal electromagnetic waves. The KGB energetics weapons use longitudinally polarized and time-polarized electromagnetic waves as their basis, rather than transversely polarized electromagnetic waves. There is a surge of renewed U.S. interest and a revolution in electrodynamics just underway in this country, and in the major weapons laboratories of other nations, vis-a-vis longitudinal electromagnetic wave solutions to the major equations of physics. For example, one may check the Los Alamos National Laboratory Internet website for summary papers by Rodriguez and L.U. There are now formal M-wave solutions faster than light speed, slower than light speed, etc. There is also experimental support for superluminal tunneling of electromagnetic waves in waveguides. In addition, as is well known, the speed of the ordinary scalar potential is infinite in the Coulomb transverse gauge. Higher topological algebra is being used to embed the electrodynamics in most of the KGB energetics work. Maxwell's original theory was some 20 quaternion and quaternion-like equations in 20 unknowns. Quaternion algebra has a higher topology than either vectors or tensors. Heaviside and others reduced the quaternion-like theory of Maxwell down to 4 equations in 4 unknowns or to 2 coupled equations, depending upon how represented, and formed the much lower topology vector algebra in the process. This seriously demoted the topology of electrodynamics and placed undue limitations upon what can be done with it. The subsequent mathematical promotion of electrodynamics to tensor algebras still did not recover much of the electromagnetic functioning possible in quaternion algebra. An even vaster, far more powerful electrodynamics emerges in Clifford algebra electrodynamics, which may be the coming modern trend. However, even with Clifford algebra, there remain fundamental foundations difficulties such as bluntly confusing energy transport with energy dissipation, by arbitrarily integrating the Poynting vector around a closed surface so as to select only the divergent portion of the Poynting energy flow. That produces the energy dissipation flow associated with the circuit, not the overall energy flow associated with it. The overall energy flow is some 10-13 times greater in a nominal case, as 1. Discovered by Heaviside in the 1880s, 2. Never even considered by Poynting, and 3. Deliberately discarded by Lorentz with a little integration trick still used by classical electrodynamicists and electrical engineers. Electrical engineering departments, professors, and texts do not know and do not teach that all M-power sources such as generators and batteries actually pour out of their terminals a far greater energy flow than the meager shaft energy input to the generator or the chemical energy dissipated in the battery. Lorentz arbitrarily discarded the huge Heaviside non-diverged output energy flow component a century ago, with the observation that it has no physical significance. Part of the emerging electrodynamics revolution is intuitively obvious. Higher topology algebra used in one's electrodynamics model means that lots more things can be done in circuits, equipment, and components. As an example, suppose one can only draw geometrical figures on a flat, uncurved plane. Then compare the figures there to what can be drawn when a third dimension is added so that the plane can be curved, twisted, folded, stretched, compressed, etc. in three-dimensional space. That is similar to the dramatic differences between electrodynamics in a higher topology algebra and electrodynamics in the far more limited tensor and vector algebras. Further, if someone's circuits are working in a higher topology, a lower topology analysis will not even see their true functioning. This turns out to be true for Tesla's work, where so many pundits have used vector or tensor algebra in the belief that they therefore knew what Tesla was doing. They did not, nor did they even use the proper tools to see what he did. For the proof, see Barrett's examination of Tesla's actual patented circuits, using quaternions. Energy, and wave speed are all dramatically altered. The energy of a pure longitudinal electromagnetic wave is infinite, unlimited. In practice, only an imperfect LW is produced experimentally, and therefore its energy is finite, but that energy may be extremely large, and the wave's propagation may be many times faster than the speed of light. This is much like quantum tunneling, which has been measured to be superluminal. NIMS et Alabama, for example, have transmitted Mozart's 40th Symphony through a barrier in a waveguide at 4.7 times the speed of light. Other researchers have transmitted information at lesser velocities but still at greater than c, the speed of light in standard vacuum. Einstein assumed light speed in vacuum to be universally constant. That is correct for transverse photons and transverse M waves, but not necessarily for other polarizations. Instead, it can be a function of the energy density of the vacuum, i.e., its stress energy density, which can be a matter of the gauge and the wave polarization. Further, C as a constant applies to transverse polarized electromagnetic waves, which are surface waves of the medium, so to speak, and not to longitudinal or time polarized electromagnetic waves, which are subsurface or subspace waves. In general, the speed of the electromagnetic wave can be a function of the energy density of the vacuum, i.e., its stress-time energy density. And it is also a function of the type of electromagnetic wave being utilized. Empty space is filled and writhing with the continual transiting of higher-order electromagnetic waves, the presence of standing high-order electromagnetic waves, and energetically organized regions where the energy is in the LW mode and in the time density mode. Indeed, space, more correctly, spacetime, itself is nothing but a plenum of such waves and their wave-to-wave interactions. The longitudinal and time density effects in empty space are correlated with seasonal and periodic variations of time charging and longitudinal electromagnetic wave emissions from planets, stars, etc. As a result, the characteristics of empty space itself periodically vary, and these can be detected as variations in the speed of light through the affected space. The interplanetary radar measurements, for example, do indeed show several periodic variations of the speed of light in interplanetary space, on a weekly and essentially monthly basis. In this data, the proclaimed constant speed of light is upheld only by averaging the measurements over a month-long period, as shown by Wallace 106. Actually, the scientists are dealing with variations of the periodically varying local time density of spacetime, but have not taken that into account. There are also specialized galloping wave zones, created by variations in the interferometry of the interpassing and interfering longitudinal electromagnetic waves in space. Such galloping waves from wave interferometry are already known in the literature from 0.1 to 100 times the speed of light, but they do this on a surge forward and lag backward mode about an average speed of c in the laboratory here on Earth. In space away from planetary masses, that value c varies from its textbook value also. All that has really been shown is that interplanetary space is not quite uniform after all, contrary to present scientific assumptions. One would think that this fundamental foundations anomaly shown by the interplanetary radar measurements would excite the entire scientific community and trigger a massive scientific investigation. Instead, scientists such as Wallace, who publish critical analyses showing that the data directly prove the variation of c in ordinary space, are just ignored and essentially parked on the sidelines until they eventually fade away. A process for creating longitudinal and time-density electromagnetic waves. Today we know that some plasmas very often can produce a longitudinal electromagnetic wave from a transverse electromagnetic wave, and can produce a transverse electromagnetic wave from an input longitudinal electromagnetic wave. This was not known when the priori team was performing its experimental work. However, it provides one method for producing and detecting longitudinal electromagnetic waves. The priori team in France unwittingly made longitudinal electromagnetic waves by inputting transverse electromagnetic waves into priori's rotating plasma in a giant plasma tube. At the end of the project, priori had developed a large unit to treat humans. A few were treated. Cures replicated what had been done in lab animals. The massive size of the unit and long treatment time, hours, made the process bulky and very inconvenient and expensive. We proposed a way to do it with a suitcase-sized unit and a treatment time of 12 minutes asterisk. Priori's large plasma tube installation in his 3 stories, high treatment facility for humans. Results obtained in animal experiments were also duplicated in human experiments. Quantum potentials and multiply connected space-time. It appears that a sufficiently clean longitudinal electromagnetic wave can be utilized to create a quantum potential, very similar to Bohm's notion, by iterative retroreflection between two-phase conjugate reflectors. When sufficient iterative self-targeting occurs and persists, the waves eventually snap in and fully converge to laser-like beams without any energy divergence. At that point, one has achieved an essentially pure longitudinal wave, which has infinite velocity. For all practical purposes, there is then little or no difference between this wave and a quantum potential. A pure longitudinal electromagnetic wave just appears instantly everywhere in space that it will be. It is already an element of a quantum potential. In this sense, all that a quantum potential is an ordinary scalar potential in which the composite electromagnetic longitudinal phase conjugate wave pairs really are pure longitudinal electromagnetic waves. It would seem that this also moves the gauge to the Coulomb gauge, so far as the potential is concerned. It follows that, by establishing significant and clean longitudinal M-wave contact between any 2 points via iterative retroreflections, one establishes a quantum potential if sufficient harmonics are established in the contact. The implications for phase conjugate shooting to go one step farther are obvious. By scanning an area with the appropriate longitudinal wave transmitter array, with deliberately imperfect longitudinal waves so that contact reaction occurs, and then decreasing the imperfections in the scanning by iterative retroreflection, it appears that a quantum potential can be created and connected between the transmitters and a desired distant region. Essentially, in the case of pure longitudinal M waves and quantum potentials, we must model the situation in terms of a multiply connected space-time. The divergence-free waves are now pure longitudinal waves in one sense, and pure potential beams in another sense. In any case, the Coulomb gauge applies. As is well known, the potential moves at infinite velocity in the Coulomb gauge. Thus a single station can be connected by such a quantum potential to any number of distant stations by first knitting them together into a common multiply connected spacetime by iterative mutual longitudinal wave self-targeting beams. It matters not if one or more distant station, S, are then moved beyond the star Sirius. The moment an energy signal appears in the initiating station, it is already instantly in each distant coupled station anywhere in the entire universe. There is no separation distance involved. Here one no longer needs to propagate transverse M-wave energy painfully through space at the speed of light. Instead, one is now dealing with multiply connected space-time. One now has the instant appearance in each and every distant coupled target of the energy input into the single transmitting or coupling station. So the process is a startling and giant energy amplification method as should be expected from something that has infinite energy in the first place. One vulnerability and disadvantage of a quantum potential weapon is that, if the target is aware of one's coupling and also has QP technology, he can now immediately send back any energy form or greetings he wishes, from any one of his coupled targets. He can even do it inadvertently, without even knowing he has been coupled by a quantum potential. In other words, the quantum potential provides a two-way street, if the target is aware of it and has the technology himself, and even if he is unaware of it and does not have the technology. For that reason, actual use of the quantum potential weapon in strategic strikes requires caution and special considerations. Usually it requires very rapid single use and then cessation of any further usage. Need for caution with quantum potentials used against biological organisms. Another quantum potential weapon disadvantage is that rather extreme care must be rigidly exercised, particularly when linking living creatures. For living things, the quantum potential is best utilized in the absolute minimum energy mode. For example, an extremely weak quantum potential already links every member of the human species. Suppose one increased that linkage intensity carelessly. Immediately the entire human race is in grave difficulty. Every death of a person feeds into every other living person. Every birth of a baby feeds into every living human. Even the fertilization of one human ova instantly feeds into all other ova. The integration of all those changes would totally disrupt and instantly destroy all human life on Earth. Since chimpanzees have very similar genetics to that of humans, all the chimps would probably die also. Other higher primates would also suffer or die, as would many other species. What might be useful, of course, would be to use a quantum potential to kill every smallpox, HIV, Ebola, and other dread disease pathogen on Earth. If so, it would first have to be made extraordinarily specific, else it could threaten all or most of the life on Earth. A very useful adjunct would be to use a quantum potential device to nearly instantly scrub and decontaminate, disinfect, an anthrax-contaminated large city such as New York or Washington, D.C. by instantly killing all the anthrax spores in that locality. Or to clean all the antibiotic-resistant staph pathogens out of U.S. hospitals by just killing them all instantly and periodically. Or to rid the earth of necrotizing fasciitis flesh-eating disease pathogens. An extremely localized quantum potential could be used to connect with all HIV viruses and DNA inside an AIDS patient's own DNA. One could then kill the HIV viruses not yet integrated into the patient's cellular DNA. One could also time reverse the patient's own HIV-infected DNA back to normal, effectively removing the HIV DNA already dumped into the patient's own infected cells. In theory, 100% of the HIV infection could be removed from the patient's body, restoring him or her to a completely HIV-free condition. A hypothetical example. Suppose one arbitrarily increased the even weaker quantum potential that presently joins all living things on Earth, regardless of species. Instantly every living thing on Earth would die, and the Earth would be instantly converted to a sterile planet. Even though physically embodied life was gone, however, all the forms of those species would remain in space-time activity, their vacuum engines for both minds and bodies forever embedded in the local potentials and fields of the material Earth. In other words, the Earth's potentials and the local space-time potential would still be dimensioned and conditioned for the life forms that once moved upon it in physical form. The dimensioning and conditioning engines for every life form that ever lived on the Earth exists now at every point in the Earth and in the local space-time. With proper application of energetics, in theory it is possible to recover any of these life forms desired, back into living form. When one understands that environmental aspect, one understands why the Miller-Fox-Urey biogenesis experiments would still produce living organisms again. A physically dead planet or test flask is not necessarily a completely dead planet or flask, when one considers the presence of space-time engines and dimensioned potentials. One recalls that these forms and engines contain not only physical forms, but also the mind aspects and the mind/body coupling and dynamics aspects as well. In short, the entire biochemical notion of biogenesis from truly inert matter devoid of any form of life or pattern of life appears to be a false premise. Since potentials reach to the end of the universe, then any structured potential structures, dimensions, the universal vacuum potential everywhere in the universe. The Miller-Fox-Urey experiments were not performed in a truly sterile environment after all, when the new energetics is considered. One realizes that the entire universe is alive, the mere presence of a single living microbe or other form anywhere establishes an entire living noosphere. The Russian researchers such as Kazanachayev into electromagnetic induction of disease in targeted cells at a distance also realized that biology included a noosphere, and it could be engineered. Typical Miller-Fox-Urey biogenesis experimental apparatus. Engines of and from all life forms ever on Earth or in the universe exist in the ambient vacuum potential. The Miller-Fox-Urey experiments were not in a sterile environment. Heat infrared and ultraviolet constitute a harmonic interval with a difference frequency, and amplifying by the process previously shown. These experiments kindled previously living forms from the available gases by amplifying the ancient living engines from their virtual state to the observable state, so that the masses were molded into the physical states of their templates. Herman Kahn, then director of the Hudson Institute, a leading think tank, once remarked that it did not concern him that there existed mechanisms that would destroy all physical life on Earth. Instead, he stated, it concerned him that he know almost 200 such mechanisms. The quantum potential weaponry is yet another doomsday weapon with 1,000 lethal mechanisms to add to Kahn's list, were he still with us. The quantum potential weapon is a superb energy amplifier for free. In a multiply-connected space-time established between multiple separated, to the observer, stations, one can instantly input 1 megawatt of power into every distant station by inputting it into a single station. Suppose that coupling station is coupled via quantum potential to 1 million distant stations, scattered anywhere in the universe. Then in each distant coupled station there now instantly appears 1 megawatt of power, even though we have input only a single megawatt in our transmitter coupled station. This is a superb one-on-many weapons system and energy amplifier, perhaps the ultimate weapons system. As an analogy for understanding, one can look at it this way. Put a point, on a piece of paper. Mathematics tells us that an indefinite number of other points can be superposed directly on that original point. Now input some energy into the original point. It instantly appears in each and every other superposed point. That is precisely the way a quantum potential linkage between stations works, except that in normal singly connected 3-space the points are observed by a normal observer to be widely separated. Aristotelian logic, which is an either/or logic, does not apply. Instead, a higher topology logic applies. The quantum potential weapon can be used with microwatt input to induce low-level disease states or pre-disease states, shadow disease states, in entire populations. Tests done in this fashion will violate the vector carrier aspect of infectious disease transmission. Instead, the tests will cause a few widely spaced nearly simultaneously cases of the disease being tested. Several such tests, for example, with necrotizing fasciitis, have already been conducted in the populace of the United States. The shadow disease state is that structured virtual state level of the promoting disease engine template, at which the immune system reacts. Or a quantum potential weapon can be used with megawatt or gigawatt input to blast multiple distant targets simultaneously. One may destroy, for example, every single transmitter of a given type. Or one may instantly kill all ships and weapons and paraphernalia in a large naval task force steaming toward its target. Or if one wishes to take the ships and equipment, the weapon can just kill all the humans instantly in that task force. Intercontinental ballistic missile sites, for example, are vulnerable and obsolete since 1990 to any nation possessing quantum potential weapons. So are underwater nuclear submarines and long-range strategic bombers. The entire strategic and tactical armada we have built up so painfully over the decades is obsoleted, also meaning countered by any enemy possessing sufficiently advanced energetics weapons, and particularly quantum potential weapons. Other novel uses of quantum potential weapons. If an enemy has such quantum potential weapons and you do not, you are easily and directly destroyed at will, once certain other deterrents are overcome. One of these previous deterrents that had to be overcome was the stability of nuclear weapons in our nuclear arsenal. To remove this stability and render them easily destroyed, the holder of a scalar interferometry capability could induce sudden massive fissioning and fusioning of many of the targeted on-site weapons if the scalar potential interferometers were used massively. However, the resulting tremendous nuclear explosions, many in the dirt and dirty, would also unacceptably damage the attacker. Further, major antagonists usually clandestinely introduced hidden nuclear weapons into the cities and target areas of their opponents, which practice was known as dead man fusing. The notion was that, even if one side suddenly destroyed the other, that destroyed side could still detonate its secret nuclear weapons hidden in the attacker's homeland territory, destroying him as well. In essence, the killed side, the dead man, had set off the fusing of his pre-planted weapons, to destroy the attacker even though the dead man was already dead. One strong reason that the Russians pursued the quantum potential weapon so strongly was precisely because it offered a mechanism to solve this dead man fusing problem, removing it as a viable deterrent. Obviously it would be quite advantageous to be able to detonate or destroy these hostile weapons in one's very midst, even though one did not know their locations, and pull the fangs of the dead man fusing installed by one's opponent. There appear to be ways of directly connecting a quantum potential, for example, to every atomic nucleus of a given type, in a given region, say, in a region consisting of on the surface of the Earth, in the Earth to some depth, in nearby space, on the surface of the ocean, and beneath the ocean. Connection can be made, for example, to every uranium-235 nucleus and to every weapons-grade plutonium nucleus. Or with the technology developed, the users ought to be able to make such connection only between certain pre-selected localized amounts of uranium-235 nuclei or plutonium nuclei. Now suppose that such a quantum potential is established between weapon-sized groups of uranium-235 atoms. Then one hits one uranium-235 nucleus in such a group in an activator station with a neutron bullet. Voila! One simultaneously hits every other linked uranium-235 atom, including the activator station. One just blew it to smithereens if it contained very many uranium-235 nuclei, in such weapon-sized groups. The raw uranium-235 in ores in nature is still okay if the ore contained only tiny traces of uranium-235 nuclei. But all the neutron-struck fissionable nuclei in nuclear weapons worldwide, regardless of owner or location, fission in the weapons immediately. That destroys all the nuclear weapons on Earth, including the clandestine nuclear weapons that various nations have spirited into other nations perceived to be their enemies, as a checkmate against sudden surprise attack. One does not need to know where a weapon is at all. However, it gets all the weapons by exploding them, and that itself could create a giant nuclear destruction and fallout problem that would probably do in most life on Earth, because a great many nuclear weapons will have exploded in the dirt and dirty. In short, it is an entirely unacceptable solution to the dead man fusing problem. Of course, no sane enemy would wish to use the QP in such fashion, because it is quite suicidal for him and essentially destroys civilization. But suppose the sane enemy is well aware of the exact nature of the new cold-type nuclear reactions. We explain these in an initial rough paper given in August 1998 at an energy conference in Utah. The energy initiating these time-reversed nuclear reactions starts from inside the nucleons in the nucleus and moves outward. That is true of any reversed zone. Via quantum potential, joining uranium-235 and plutonium in warheads includes weapons airborne, underwater, in storage transmutations of the nuclides themselves. Part of the initial barrage launched by Yakuza KGB will occur in the first minutes of the strategic strike, following psycho-energetically crew-disabling quantum potential weapons duds, both overt and covert nuclear weapons and weapons-grade materials, including suitcase-delivered covered weapons on site in Russia, which otherwise provide dead man fusing simultaneous dudding of nuclear weapons worldwide. Also duds nuclear reactors and nuclear propulsion systems. Direct isomeric transmutation then becomes a preferred decay reaction to induce in the nuclear weapons one wishes to dud. By gradually inducing, slowly kindling, one of these transmutation reactions, one can just transmute the uranium-235 to, say, an isomer such as uranium-238, with some readjustment and energy balancing in the ensuing rebalancing decay processes. In that way, one gets no nuclear explosions. One can even choose the transformation or several successive transformations so as to minimize any resulting nuclear radiation. The attacker also destroys all the nuclear reactors, including those in civilian power plants, nuclear submarines, and elsewhere. But he gets just about all the nuclear weapons if he transforms both uranium-235 and plutonium. In about 10 minutes he will dud them all, without any nuclear explosions, but he would probably allow about 1 hour just for good measure and nearly 100% certainty. This offered the Soviets the ideal solution to the worrisome hostile nuclear arsenals of the world, since they also had additional non-nuclear strategic weapons of a different kind and of great power. Apparently that very kind of quantum potential weapon became operational, on site in Russia, circa 1989 under KGB control. For the first time, it provided the KGB with a guaranteed solution to the nuclear dead man fusing problem that had until then prevented its massive use of the scalar potential interferometers, such as in 1985, 1986 as originally envisioned by Brezhnev. By almost simultaneously leasing the earlier scalar interferometer weapons to the Yakuza and Aum Shinrikyo at the end of 1989, the KGB obtained an influx of vast new funds. It thus concentrated even more intensely on the more advanced energetics weapons such as QP weapons and psychoenergetics weapons. So with a quantum potential weapon one can attack multitudes of targets, using a single coupler or transmitter, all without propagating the electromagnetic energy through three-dimensional space. Further, with the technology developed, only the number of outrigger stations coupled limits the energy amplification achievable. One can alter matter at any level, from the quarks in the protons and neutrons in the nucleus, to the lattice bonds, to the molecular bonds, etc. Or one can structure the emerging energy, that emerges directly out of the local space-time itself, so that structured local space-time curvatures, engines, appear in the target zone, S. These street engines can be generated so as to perform macroscopic functions against real systems, for example, jamming electronics, as against the US air attack on Libya in April 1986, or as was done by a longitudinal M-wave interferometer in the attack and kill of the USS Thresher in April 1963.